I think.
Yeah, we did some major slash and burn on that.
Yeah.
31st.
Yes.
March 31st.
I still remember the time. Stevie Coppell, Linda
All right,
Greenlaw.
so I'm going to call the meeting to order tonight on the Budget Committee meeting, March 31st, 6 o'clock here at the Opera House, lower level. We got the Budget Committee meeting in attendance at the table with the exception of Zach Herrick and Doug Cole. Also have John Duke and Megan Brackett. So on tonight's agenda, what we're going to go over is a recommendation or a bylaw discussion. Select Board recommended some changes to our bylaws. We'll also try to go over some formal recommendations for the Select Board that the Budget Committee will be making. Probably also open it up to a little bit broader discussion outside of formal recommendations after that, and then adjourn. So, to start it off, I think if we go over the bylaw discussion, the Select Board has made a recommendation to amend our bylaws. Long story short, basically to change.
Where is that?
That was in the town email that we should have followed up with better today. I should have called you, but that was sent out this morning. So their recommendation, let me get the verbiage correct.
Do you have that?
I don't have it right in front of me.
Yeah. Could we get paper copies of that so we know what you're talking about?
Hold on, I got it.
I don't know a way to print it.
The Select Board would like to make a recommendation that in Section 3 of our bylaws, that we add a provision that excludes sitting Select Board members from becoming sitting members of the Budget Committee. I think that's to basically avoid in the past any positions that might happen, or someone that might happen to sit in both the position of the Select Board and the Budget Committee. Are there any members of the Select Board that want to elaborate any further on that? Go into any more detail? I mean, it's relatively, I think, pretty straightforward in what their recommendation is, but.
Yeah, I didn't know this was going to come up tonight, but I think it's something that we have wanted to see because it sort of keeps the lines clear between the Select Board and the Budget Committee. No one citizen has more than one vote on these issues. We've seen, it's just something we think is sort of just good government, but so I guess that's the recommendation.
Okay, any other discussion on the recommendation from any of the members of the Budget Committee? No. Any questions on what the actual recommendation is, what it may entail?
Since we don't have anything to look at except on a phone, it's a little hard to.
Yeah, I mean, more or less, it's basically, even if it was verbal, it would be a recommendation to change Section 3, amend it so that in there would include verbiage to say that anyone sitting on the Select Board cannot also sit on the Budget Committee.
So as a draft, I put a sentence that it is prohibited for any one member to serve on the Select Board and the Budget Committee concurrently.
But just by point of fair, this originated with the Select Board, not with the Budget Committee.
Correct. So we haven't changed anything right now.
Right.
We don't necessarily even have to change it tonight. We don't need to make a motion, but at least I think it's now on all of our radar. The point was at least to get it onto our radar so that going into next budget cycle, we would have it possibly amended for then.
That was something that we tried to get into the charter when we wrote ages and ages ago. And then the Select Board amended the charter, excuse me, and it didn't go in then either. But it's long been a problem of select board members sitting on the budget committee and vice versa. And it's not right. In fact, it's in Camden's charter that it cannot happen.
So you want to also see the charter changed outside.
Well, both, it should be.
Select board charter changed also, and not just the budget committee bylaws. I mean, we obviously only have the power here tonight to
Yeah.
make a motion and second and vote on amending our bylaws. So do I hear any motion?
So moved. Or we change it and select board budget, no.
Second.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Let's open it up to any discussion on the motion to amend section 3 of our bylaws to include verbiage 2. No one member can congruently sit on both the budget committee and select board. Okay, let's open up to a vote. All in favor? Unanimous. So we will amend those bylaws. Okay, so the next, I think, goal of tonight is to come up with formal recommendations for the select board to make amendments to their budget. I think obviously this could get pretty in-depth. If we kind of break it up into two sections, the first being finite recommendations that we could make to them. Second, kind of part of the meeting is more broader changes to either the process or recommendations to the overall, I guess, maybe budget theory or how we come up with our budget. Maybe that will include any changes to the process of the time frame of when we're meeting as a budget committee, what we have for positions, what we have for, inclusion in any bond issues that come up, if the budget committee should be included in that. So I think what we've done in the past is to basically start at the beginning of our budget, go through department by department, see what we have, if any changes in that department, and that will tend to, I think, keep our finite recommendations for the select board. Any questions on that, or thoughts, or opinions? Okay. So I think we start, most of the budget, the departments start on 101, if I'm not mistaken, for General Government Administration, Department 201. I guess I could also ask the public that's here tonight if they have any questions before we dive right in here.
I've got the mic.
Any
Need it.
comments? We got a mobile mic, so we can pass that around if anyone wants to speak up. Okay. Page 101, General Government Administration. Any thoughts or questions, changes on that? I didn't have a lot of notes from what we talked about in this section as we were going through the process. All right, I know sometimes it's hard on the fly to just come up with some questions, but I didn't have any changes or recommendations in this department. Okay.
I think we ran into this when we went through this the first time, which is we've raised the issue of some of these cross-cutting
Yep.
pieces, salary benefits, these kinds of things that cross-cut the entire town government and sit as a big pot of money by themselves. It's not really a vehicle going line by line to say we should do X about that.
Sure.
I don't know how we would tackle that.
Yeah, and I think probably what we would end up having to do is each line item, let's just say, for instance, you know, just because we're on general government town manager now. If we said 2505, that same section 2505 is a congruent line number for all
Right.
departments. So we could recommend or, you know, have a discussion on that particular line item. And if we were to want to make a change across the board, whether it was percentage based or whatnot in each department, then we could reference in our motion that line number. And as we went through, it would more or less be a blanket coverage
Across all of it.
across all the departments in that line number.
I think that's the only way we can go, but it will be, if we were to make a recommendation, Budget Committee says X, each of the budgets are broken out to individual departments. And I don't know, Megan, is that, if for some reason we said 10% less, you know, we want to see in benefits and what have you, is that easily applied to a number? Because in the end, what we want is a number, as opposed to a philosophy or this thing that, I mean, we want a philosophy at some point, but what does that do to you to have a recommendation to take what amounts to a multi-departmental expense?
You probably just wouldn't be able to have a total today. Because,
Wouldn't
like-
have to have a total today, yeah.
Right, so
Okay.
like, if you did it percentage based, then it's gonna be different for each department.
Right.
Unless it has the same number of employees. or something
And
like that.
the same number of people doing family, et cetera.
But we could,
Depending on what it is.
you know, if we're percentage based, we could still, where's that incredibly long chart that has all the different line by line items? Is that, and I mean, that has the total expense in that line item per year, right?
It starts on page 87.
Yeah, okay.
So Jeff, are you just asking to have a percentage, like, in that summary table, to be able to show exactly what each department comprises a percentage of the whole?
Yeah, I think something like it's an umbrella, insurance is an umbrella, and
Yeah.
to have a goal and say, Budget Committee says spend 10% less, in the end, we need a number.
Yeah.
So the question was, how difficult is that to come up with a number?
We could do it just based off the total.
Yeah.
So, again, this is a new guy question, but, so I'm hearing that really the only tool we have at hand right now is a number for some combination of budget lines. There's not really a vehicle to say, we think that these costs are unsustainable for the town. We would recommend that the select board direct the town manager to impanel a task force over the summer with the goal of identifying savings across these lines amounting to $50,000, something like that.
I certainly think that that is a recommendation we can make. It just that particular recommendation wouldn't necessarily be captured on the ballot,
Right.
is what'll happen. So we could make that,
Part of this idea of a letter that we talked about
Right.
last meeting.
and that, I think I think the best way to do that is to basically have a letter that we're presenting to John or whoever, the select board, that
Yeah.
is published in the paper. And that is the best way to get it in front of everyone so that, you know, that's where the red flag is going off for people to see that the budget committee is not happy with whatever
Right.
is going on.
Or sees this as a problem that needs to be tackled.
Yeah, because I think, you know, outside of sitting here with numbers and trying to change numbers in the budget on the paper, how we actually get captured,
Yeah.
what we're trying to do, there isn't really a
Not a
vehicle
good-
for that yet, which I think we all agree needs to change. So going forward. I think that's what our goal is to get that so we can voice bigger changes to it, to the budget process as a whole, not so much this fiscal year budget.
Yeah. Yeah, the challenge is, I mean, the challenge is putting a number out there without context around it. You know, and I know there's a lot of folks here, I worried that we got into a discussion at the end of the last meeting where all kinds of suggestions and accusations were thrown around about we're gonna cut this, we're gonna cut that. And suggesting a number without saying how we think that number could be gotten to by what means it could be achieved, right? I mean, that's the challenge, just say, I think we should cut $50,000. Well,
Sure, yeah, right.
right, so,
And I think when we make that recommendation to the select board, us making the we can recommend to them whatever we want,
Yeah.
basically, but they're gonna try and put onto the ballot what our recommendation was. And if they're still not, even if we give them a 20-page recommendation, if they can't capture that onto the ballot, it's still not gonna signal to the public
there's
what
no way.
needs to change, which is what our point is
yeah.
with these recommendations. So, I think that's why we're trying to get information to the public via the ballot, what they see on the ballot, by just what our actual votes are. And then we also need to come up with a way, I mean, realistically, one way to get our information to the public is have the public come to the budget meetings, but that doesn't happen. So, that is one of the vehicles that's just not really used.
On the other hand, 67 people watched the video.
Well,
at
that's
some point
valid. That's valid.
last week.
We're breaking into the town percentage right there.
Must see TV.
So I don't know if we have any recommendations, if we want to, or even any discussion about particular line items that might be blanket across multiple departments, if we want to get into that. That's not the right verbiage. If we want to open it up to talking about a broader picture, or if we want to just go department by department, line by line, if we have
Let's
any
do that
questions.
first and then do the policy after.
Yep, I would agree with that. So
Sorry.
Hollywood over there.
My phone popular.
So are there any suggestions, points of topic that we want to discuss that are somewhat blanket across? I know insurance has been a big one. Is there any
I thought we
more?
were going to go through the budget and then talk about policy and.
Yeah,
why
but
things
what
get-
we're gonna try to do is the budget, but if we're gonna have some recommendations that go across all the different departments that are still a line item in the department that aren't a budget process change, then we should maybe talk about those first so that we don't have to talk about them in every department. I.e. wages, healthcare,
Mowing.
mowing.
Okay, so we skip those till the end.
I would talk about them in the beginning, just because if it's gonna,
But they're policy, they're not the budget. We can't change we're not changing the budget, we're just talking about changing
if
the
there's
policy.
recommendations to change the budget in those line items, I think we should talk about them up front so that we can have them covered per department.
Okay.
And then if there's a department that's exception to any blanket change, then we can talk about it then.
I'm going to try one more gasp to have you reconsider that, in that I think we should do what the Budget Committee has historically done, which is pick it apart and say, no, we want this item to go away or something like that. That, in a sense, is the easiest. It might be voluminous, but it's the easiest. Get that done because that's precedence, and then go shift gears into policy, which is an open-ended, it's an open-ended discussion.
Yes, but if, let's say someone wants to change insurance by a flat rate % on every department, I don't wanna talk about
Yeah.
insurance in every
Oh,
department.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
So I
Yeah.
think we do
Agreed.
that up front. Say we want to change insurance by 10% across the board, and then we'll know as we go through our departments, because there may be a department that is an exception to it, but then we know every department, we want to change it by 10% or what have you.
But
And
how
then-
are we gonna change something that's already set by the MMA and the union contracts?
And I don't know that we can change it for this budget. I think all we can do is ask them to change the process on how they come up with the number to see if they can lower it in the future.
Those would be the systemic recommendations we make for next year.
Agreed. So that if we don't have any blanket changes that we want to make across a line item that actually is a finite number change, then we can just continue on department by department.
I think, as one of the instigators of the last discussion, I think, I'll speak my case, which is I do think we could make a suggestion to change these numbers in this budget. And I don't think that would necessarily be crazy. However, I don't know that it would be wise either. I do think, my personal opinion is we do need to look at these benefit costs. And I do think they, and that doesn't mean we need to cut benefits. That just means we need to consider how we're, contributing to them, maybe consider what plans are available. And I think that's something that can be accomplished this budget year. The challenge is we don't know the outcome of that, process right now. I feel confident that we could reduce it meaningfully, and I mean 6 figures, without, causing, ruffling too many feathers. But, we have to go to commitment, we have to raise taxes to, make sure we can fund the budget. So, I think, do I think we should change the health insurance line item? Do I think we should do it now? Yes, really, I wish we could, but I don't know that it's prudent to do so. I don't know if anyone else would disagree.
Yeah, and I was just looking for the total, so 76.
It's on the first one, 85, 80. It's on page 87.
Which one?
87.
Oh, okay, up in the first section.
25.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, $1,490,610 total.
Right. It's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And it's tripled in the last few years, if you look back.
Yeah, and, I mean, essentially, what we're trying to do is modify, if we were to make a recommendation, the budget number itself. That's just what we're budgeting for this year. That isn't exactly what we're spending, that doesn't include what we are doing for a process to get that number. That's just including what number we think we should budget for this year.
Right. And not that we need to get too far into the weeds, but my 6-figure comment comes from, just 2 years ago, we were paying about 30% of wages in healthcare costs. 30% of our wages we also had to add on to pay healthcare costs. That's now going up to 37% this year, and it went up to 35% last year. And even if you can just bring it back to 30%, that saves you $250,000. Which I recognize is not, the easiest thing in the world to do it, but as proof that this town has done this in recent history, that would save real money. Now, do I want to be the one to say, we're going to cut, $300,000 in this budget year and come hell or high water? We've got to find a way to do it. No, I don't really want to be on the record. It's saying, we're going to tighten the screws that much. I mean, not that we can, but I do think there's real opportunities to save money, and I think there's ways to do it without, violating anybody's expectations too.
I have a question about the cost going up so much year by year. What year did we start paying 100% of the employee and their family and their children and 100% of the healthcare? What year was that?
We don't pay 100%. It's a 90-10 split for all of our employees.
How long have we been doing 90-10?
22.
This is-
That
yeah,
year.
yeah.
I think the personnel policy was amended in 22 when we did our last union contracts.
I was just asking to see if I could see
Yeah.
if that's the reason it went up, you know.
What was it prior to that?
Depending on your hire date, if you were hired before September of 2005, you were 100% covered. If you were hired between September of 2005 and September of 2012, it was 100% of the employee, 90% of dependent coverage. And if you were hired after September of 2012, I want to say it was 85-15. Somewhere in that ballpark, maybe 80-20. And then when the union contracts were renegotiated and the personnel policy was redone, that's when it was changed 90-10 for everybody.
And what year was that?
I think it was 2022.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you
fall
so much.
So let me just, if I can just add a little bit more to this, and somewhat plays off of some of what Walker is saying a bit. You know, we do have two unions we need to be mindful of, right? So our Public Works Department is nearly entirely unionized. Our Police Department is unionized. Those benefits are collectively bargained, and while you know, we've had a great relationship with both bargaining units and made changes in the last cycle that were very much in the mind of supporting the employees that we've had and trying to get them to a place that is in their market. That's a collectively bargained item that we would have to go back to, and that's in terms of the share of our employee base. That's almost a third of all the employees we have are already in those two unions. So we're about 2/3 of our share of our employees still are not in a union, and so while any changes could potentially impact that group, that class of employees, I would say that you do have a new union agreements that will be under discussion next year at around this time or before this time, and certainly all the changes in concert could be part of whatever that dialogue would be. But those who have been part of a union negotiation, it's certainly not something where I'm going to give away one portion of benefit without getting something else in return. And that's not unfair labor practices. Those are very fair labor practices. So, these are all parts that we need to just consider, as we go through this. There's certainly more details, and I have my own thoughts about this, but I think at least in terms of what impacts you could make tonight are very limited in terms of what the actual dollars spent, because of you have some other issues at hand.
Okay. So, any other discussion on possible changes to items that might go across multiple departments? Finite changes.
I'll say it. Mowing.
I think that would be excellent to change that.
Yeah. Unanimous agreement.
We have a contract.
I think
This is the maddening part of this, frankly. I'm gonna go home and my wife's gonna be like, "What did you do at the budget committee tonight?" And I'm gonna go, "Well, we shaved $45,000 out of a $12 million budget, and we took 3 hours to do it." Salary and benefits is 54% of the town's budget. It's the majority of the town's budget is that, and I get we're backed into a corner here, but it's just frustrating. I don't have a recommendation. I mean, I have recommendations, but I don't think it's, to John's point, I don't think the select board's interested anyway in tackling it at this time around. So our recommendation isn't going to make it happen anyway. So I just, somehow we got to get it in the record that this is unsustainable for a town of this size to absorb those kinds of expenses going forward. I don't know how to signal that to the town, but
If I may.
So frustrating.
Having been a select board member, I would counter your comment about that the select board doesn't care to take it on. I think that the select board is cast in a juggling role and a balance role, but I don't think it's fair to paint them with that particular brush, if I heard you correctly.
Well, I think the "at this time" was
Yeah.
the important.
The timing is
Yeah.
important.
Oh,
Well, I mean,
I'm
we-
sorry,
we-
I'm sorry. So
Yeah,
in-
we broached this at the end of the last meeting, and I was trying to get a sense of like, how much ambition should we come in here with?
I see.
And I got a sense of zero ambition is what would be preferred. Like, I just didn't feel like at this late stage it's hard
Yeah.
to take this on. So we're just painted into a corner. And we have to go back out and tell these folks out here, they've got to absorb another double-digit budget increase because there wasn't anything we could do about it. It's already a battleship. It can't be turned at this point other than on the margins.
Well, thank you for that clarification.
All right, so we'll carry on with department by department as we go through the budget. Page 109 in our budget books, town manager, department 205. Any changes or discussion that we want to have on this department?
This is going to seem like it comes out of left field, but I'm going to propose eliminating the newsletter budget,
What line?
line 4480. And the reason for that is I've expressed in the past a couple of times to the select board and otherwise that the newsletter in recent years has been used by the select board to advocate on behalf of the select board's position on issues before the town. So the example that I point to is when we were wrestling with the short-term rental piece. The then chair of the select board wrote a long letter that went out to everybody in town, paid for by taxpayers, that advocated for a certain position on an issue before the town and was critical of opponents of that position. So that the news, and I've seen it happen a couple of times since then. So the newsletter has, in my mind, has periodically shifted into political advocacy to say, this is an issue before the town, and this is what the select board thinks the people in the town, how they should vote on this issue. So it's good to have a newsletter. We talked about putting in the newsletter about the license plates, and there's good stuff we can put in there. But absent some type of policy that the board adopts, the select board adopts, that says the newsletter is here to provide updates and information, but may not be used. We saw it again with the wastewater thing. It was 4 or 5 pages. It said, vote for
Yeah.
this. This was a town-funded, taxpayer-funded newsletter sent to everybody in town that advocated for a political question that was before voters of the town. So unless the board's prepared to stop doing that, I'm prepared to get rid of it. I would zero out that budget item.
I think there are two issues. There's one, which is the vehicle of delivery, which is the newsletter.
Yeah.
And then there's two, which is the content.
Right. Agree?
I'd be
So-
reluctant to get rid of the vehicle.
Because its usefulness in other realms.
And there are people who aren't going to log in online, people who want to receive things and need to receive things by mail.
How often does it come out?
Yep.
I was gonna say, I think I've seen 2.
Yeah,
in the past.
we'd moved away from the 4 times a year. It really focused on the election times a year, so that's focused on your June and November, when people are sort of asking questions, what's on the ballot, how do I vote, where do I vote, what are we talking about, what's the conversation? I would, while I wasn't part of the conversation with short-term rentals, thankfully,
You didn't miss anything. It really wasn't much.
I know, but I was here for the wastewater conversation, and I think I would disagree that with the tone that the tone set with that was advocacy. It's a difficult burden or responsibility that the town has, and to hold an election, and then for one point to say, this is the proposal we have, we want you to vote on. And these are the reasons why it's being put together, but we don't think it's a good idea, but we want you to consider it. There's a fine line in some of those places
agree.
to say, we're all working really hard on behalf of the town to put together a good package for
Yeah.
you. And then, but crossing a line of vote for X.
Right,
Is,
but-
is one that I think is a tough one. So I understand what you're saying. My own sense is one who wants to, it's a huge burden. But in terms of our ability to connect with our residents, it's one of the few avenues
I
that
agree.
everyone gets. So the vehicle versus message aspect to it, I would really like to lean on keep the vehicle and maybe message received in terms of be more careful about how the message is delivered. That'd be my hope out of
Yeah.
the dialogue here.
The only thing I would say is, there's also the Penn Bay pilot. If the
Yep.
select board wants to write a letter, and you want to write a letter, and you
Yep.
all want to send it in and say, this is our position.
Yeah.
If you want to create a political action committee and buy road signs and put them up all over town, outside the town, great, knock yourselves out.
Yeah.
But using a taxpayer-funded vehicle,
Yeah.
my tax dollars, that I open up this thing that tells me how to vote on an issue that I
Yeah.
don't agree with the town's leadership on.
Yeah.
We can't keep doing that.
We might disagree in terms of
Yeah.
what was written and how that was phrased in the spring, but I get your point,
Okay.
and I think it's a good one, Steve. I think, again, and I think about when we met last week, the conversation we had about these buildings, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, a group that looks a lot like this and a couple of the people out here are going to need to get around and say, how are we going to fix these buildings? How are we going to get to that point? And at some point, there's going to be a solution. That we're going to have to get a message out and have a couple bullet points to say this is what the tax impact will be, and this is what that will be. So I think you can see where I'm going.
Yep.
It's a tough thing.
It's a balance.
I think we're on the other side of that line. I can see why you might say the wastewater was on the other side of that line, but
Right.
I think it's really important that we do keep this. I think frankly we need to do more in terms of outreach, and it's not specifically about particular issues of that magnitude, but we need to do better to connect with the 3,700 people who live here. Because there are too many people who aren't reading Penn Bay Pilot. They're not reading whatever Village Soup, Cannon Herald became.
Right.
And if we aren't the voice for that, they're not going to find out. And that newsletter is probably our single best foot forward to do that. So, and again, the vehicle is really important to
Okay.
me.
Adopt a policy. I'll be on board.
Do you want to make a formal motion?
No.
Okay.
But presumably it'll be on the list for 9:30 tonight for a policy letter of some sort or directive.
Probably not this specifically, but
Okay, so
I'll address this in other ways.
there you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Chip.
And only just to that point, I've got a list here. Denise was able to cobble together as like 12 items that were sort of big picture conversations, and I can run them down in terms of what she's keeping and will be bringing back to the board if you want me to do that now, or if you want to wait until you have your sort of broader conversation in terms of what's already on the list. We can do that later, but I just
I
want you
think
to
we'll-
know about it.
Yeah,
It's
kind
here.
of put that off.
I got it. Okay, so
Okay.
we'll keep the powder dry.
All right, so any other topics of discussion on the town manager department? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so we'll move on to the next department, town clerk and tax collector on page 113. I know there's some discussion, the kind of the bullet points in this department, we're adding some more help that John wanted to cut, well, John did cut for his numbers. Past that, I don't remember there being a huge change on any of the expenses or revenues in this department.
I want to bring up the question of a new clerk. And I guess there was some discussion at some point of possibly a part-time position shared with planning.
Yep.
And I know in the past, I think it was planning and assessors shared a,
At some point,
and
yeah.
that really
Right.
didn't go well. So are we, I don't see a new person in planning, but I think they were advertising, so that's,
Yeah, so just to sort of clear that up, so at present, this was after the budget was put together. There's an administrative assistant position that has existed in the planning and codes department. And what we've been discussing is shared time of that position with the clerk's office.
okay,
So that way we could, one, try to get some of the benefits of that, but with the clerk's department, for just staying here. But two, you know, see if there's a way to identify how much help that halftime, at least a halftime person could provide to the clerk's office.
halftime in planning, which is already something it's just simply
Right.
vacant at the moment.
Right, yeah, it's right,
Yeah.
right. There's interviews ongoing and should have a hire soon.
So you want to split what is now a full-time budgeted position in planning, has been for a while,
Yeah,
and make that part-time for planning and part-time for town clerk.
that's right. So that's how we've been operating, yeah, is that idea, yeah. I understand the need and what's been demonstrated here. Liz has done a really good job of explaining the challenges that the clerk's department sees. Really, when it talks about is the town office open, what we're really talking about is the clerk's office open, right? The rest of us are, you know, who really cares about the rest of us? But, no, I kid. But the clerk's office is the heartbeat, right, of how this all works. So Liz did a really good job of explaining the challenges that she's facing. My feeling was I really couldn't find room to devote to another full-time position to be added to the budget. So
So is
try to do a
that
little bit of both.
the vacant spot right now, that salary, that position's salary is all under planning?
That's right. Exactly.
In your hopes that if they do split with the town clerk, we're still gonna keep their salaried number in planning?
Yeah. Okay. Again, that's all sort of started after we'd
Yeah.
already, the ship had sailed, so.
Yeah.
And what are the what are the hours of the town office again? for
8 to
those
4.
What?
8 to 4.
8 to 4?
Yep.
Despite the fact that a large number of people in this town work those hours also and can't get to the town office?
It's a tough thing, Helen. A couple years ago, we had done, I can't remember how the conversation came up of how many different transactions we run in a given year. And so we looked at the transactions that we were producing at the different times of the day and looked at that over the course of the year. And the number of people who were coming in after 4 o'clock really was not worth the time. At the same time, we were offering hour lunches. So the challenge was we were having to fill that hour lunch in the middle of the day, and we had an hour afterwards where we really weren't being as productive as we could be. So it made challenges with covering those lunches and so forth. So in the end, that's what we ended up with, was an 8 to 4 day, a shorter day. I mean, we still have employees working after the 4 o'clock hour because they have to close out their day, have to close out the finances of the day. That's independent of and when you're at tax time, that's not 4:05. That's like closer to the 5 o'clock side of things. So it's yeah, it can vary.
Yeah, so you don't know how many people take off time to come because they'd work until 4 or 4:30. And
It's-
you don't know how many people actually
Yeah.
would like to come.
It's a tough thing, right? For that end, I mean, it's it's like banks and like post offices, and we all somehow find a way to get to the DMV. There's always, and sometimes we'll have to set that time aside. You're right, and get off lunch or get off from work to be able to do those things. The availability of online services also help with that too, so people can do it at 3 a.m. in their bathrobe if they want. Give them that flexibility, and they don't need to come in the office with their bathrobes either. So.
Are you sure?
I'm definitely
Pajamas.
sure about that. Positive.
So so I take it the coming year, splitting a person between planning and town clerk will be sort of if this works, we'll keep it on, and if it doesn't, we'll go for another third clerk next budget.
I think we'll see. Boy, I would. What was it Randy
Put you on
said?
the
We used to do
spot.
3-year plans, and now we do 3-month plans. I think that's, let's see how it goes. I don't like the idea of sharing employees.
Yeah.
I think it hasn't worked well in the past. I don't think it works well in general. This is a particular circumstance that I think, because the nature of both positions, I think that there's some benefits there, but by and large, I would speak against what I'm speaking for right now, because it's hard when you have to have two bosses and to have those bosses working together in conjunction, but
So is
we're gonna make it work.
Is Ryan here?
He is. Oh yeah, Ryan's here, Liz is here.
How many hours do you usually, when you had an assistant, how many hours was he or she actually doing stuff?
Go ahead.
Last full, sorry.
Yeah, it's too long. Sorry.
That's a harder question to answer. We hired, after the first full-time person that kind of transitioned over, that person was split with the assessing department, and then that person found another job. And then the next person we hired was qualified to do what I do, but she moved to the area. Then she got a job in Camden. And then we kind of went in and out of a couple of different employees that just didn't work out from the office perspective. If you understand, if you've been in there at the time before the remodel out back, it was pretty cramped in there. A lot of noise that kind of bled into their day-to-day work activities. And then this will be the first time that we'll have somebody in the new office, so I don't know exactly how that transition will go. But in terms of dedicated hours that I need, it's going to be close to the 40-hour mark, but with the crossover with what Liz has in her department, I think we're going to be able to find a way to make that work. We sat down and we evaluated what she needs, what I need, and to make this work with this given budget for this year. So, does that answer your question?
Sort of. Sounds like she needs it more than you do.
Well, that puts you in a pickle. Okay, so any other discussion or formal motions in the town clerk department? All right. With that, we'll move on to planning and community development. 209 on page 121. And this is where I believe the employee is, where the vacancy is. Are there any other changes to the budget that we want to see under the manager's proposed budget?
And can you remind us what the capital outlay from 741,000 to 12,000 is? I'm sorry, line 7,000.
That,
VPI stuff.
we removed the VPI related items, which were the Route 90 multi-use path
Okay.
and the multimodal project.
Thank you.
So we found a different avenue for that.
Pun intended.
Pun totally, yeah, 100% intended, yeah.
All right, any other questions on revenues or expenditures for planning and community development? Okay. Moving on up to finance. Miss Megan.
Yes, Megan.
Page 133 is the start of finance, Department 211. Any numbers that are sticking out to us here? Any discussion? Thanks for joining us, Chief. Okay, moving on to assessing, if there's no questions. Department 213 on page 141. I think on, on here, the only question I had was line 7405 for the capital items, paying for the reval, if we should change. I mean, I know that was a fixed cost over 4 years, but if any of the other stuff is going to be front-loaded, like this past year for expenses, if we need to be capturing that here as opposed to going in the hole in that line item. I don't know what the forecasted reval process is, but it didn't sound like, I believe when we were talking with Carrie, it didn't sound like that number was expected to be off for this year. It probably wasn't, but I should make it one. The budgeted item 7405 for the property reval, paying for that last year, or this current fiscal year, 24-25, we had a lot of expenses get pushed up. So we're paying for them in the 24-25 budget cycle. And I just wanted to see if that, I think we had talked about it before, that shouldn't happen, or we are not planning on that happening for the 25-26 budget year. Meaning, is $56,250 enough to cover what our expenses should be for this year?
Well, I'm going to have to shift to Megan. I believe, so the total cost for the reval is $190,000. We wound up paying for it when I left all that to Megan. That really doesn't make finance.
This remaining money will give us the balance that we need to finish paying through the reval through the first of the year. Because it will be finished August-ish. So this will cover us for July and August for the end of the expenses.
This $56,250 will cover
Yep.
us.
Yep.
So once we pay that, or once we pay out this year, we won't have to pay any more.
Correct. Although I would
Okay, so the total
recommend, I would recommend after this year that we start contributing to a reserve to do it again in 10 years. Because if it's 190,000 now, it's probably going to be 300,000 by the time we go to do it again.
Clay, my microphone is working now.
Okay. I like to hear it.
So let me just reiterate some part of what Megan said. We'll be paid off by that figure, however that works out, and we'll be even. The reval will be done.
At the end of fiscal year 25-26.
Yeah, yes. Some of the activities will continue, but we'll be done paying for it.
Okay. All right.
Carrie, can you remind us what the software licenses were?
So we use Vision camera system, which is computer assisted mass appraisal. That's the main one in there.
And is that really just for this year with the reval, and then it goes down
Oh,
next
no,
year?
no.
It's
every year.
ongoing.
Yeah,
Okay.
actually has nothing to do with the reval.
Okay.
That's our main piece of software that we use.
Got it.
I sit in front of that screen about 90% of my day.
Lucky you.
But Carrie, the amount of that's doubled over the last couple of, from 23-24 to both 24-25 and 25-26.
Yeah.
I believe wasn't that be mobile assessor potentially going into that?
Well, yeah, mobile assessor
Yeah.
is part of that. That's a new program that we got last year that we use. It helps Rebecca and I get inspections done more expeditiously. I think, is there anything else in there?
I think that was the two.
Yeah. But that somewhat explains the growth when you look at 8,000 and
Vision at one
14,000.
point was more expensive when we used their cloud service, and so we stopped doing that because that just made it, in our minds, unreasonable. So we brought it in-house, we bought a server. For the cost that we were paying for their cloud service, we could buy a server every year. So we're saving that way.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on assessing?
Revenue.
They do.
Making good revenue upstairs.
You're huge upstairs.
Thank you.
I think you should get a discount.
Soundtrack,
Yeah. All right, so I think we'll move along unless there's any other questions on assessing.
I have a quick procedural question.
Yeah,
If my memory serves me correctly, there'll be roughly 10 warrant items on the written ballot. And so
More or
this
less.
gets, and then the budget committee, recommends X for a particular thing. The divisions, this is more divisions than that ballot has. The question is, are we going to look at that breakdown and say within this ballot measure number 3, for instance, that incorporates, pages 1 through 108 through 212, or should we be doing that as we go along right now? So are we leaving a step out to only to do it later?
I don't think we even know what the warrant is gonna look like right now, I'm assuming. So what we'll end up doing is whatever section our recommendations will be pertinent to will be the,
So that'll just be a matrix.
presume.
So in the past, the way that we've worded the warrant article is there's all the departments with the expense numbers, and then the select board does recommendation votes based on the whole warrant article. And under that, it will say budget committee recommendations. One year, you added $5,000 to the assessing budget for something. So it said,
I feel
added
confident
$5,000
it's
to the assessing budget for X, and then it will have your vote.
Underneath all the splits of all that. I thought I remembered that
Assuming
it
it's
was.
a positive vote, like
it was
if
more
it's
enumerated.
a for favor vote. If there's a motion that's made that isn't in favor of a majority on the budget committee, then it doesn't show up.
Only the motions that carry,
Right.
right? Because we could have, 2
Okay.
to 6, well, who cares, it's, what are the impacts that this group wants the world to know? You should add $80,000 for, to assessing, I don't know.
And then next to that, it
You're
will
welcome.
say, next to that, it will say whether the select board adopted the change
Yes.
or not adopted.
Right, okay.
Right.
Yeah. So I just didn't want to get too far along with, and missing that one part that,
Yeah.
thank you.
okay, so we'll move right along to insurance. Department 216, page 147. Any questions here? Okay, no topics of discussion here.
Wasn't intentional.
All right, moving on to public assistance, general assistance, Department 303 on page 155. Any questions here? Relatively abbreviated department. Okay.
The cameras are shaking.
Are they?
Well, after the meeting, we'll all go upstairs and join the Congo line.
Exactly.
They're making a lot of motions.
I was gonna say.
All right, I think we'll move on to public safety. Starting with the police department, Department 401, page 163. There's a little talk back and forth, obviously, about the new or a proposed officer. I don't think there is anything else drastic. We are also including cruiser and body cameras in this department budget this cycle, which I think will be good. I think we pushed for them last year anyways.
You did.
So, one thing when I was looking through to, again, hamstrung as we are to find savings here at this late hour, we have vehicle reserves, equipment reserves across a number of lines. That's another cross-cutting piece. I think reserves are a great idea. We should be doing more of that. But in a desperate attempt to find some kind of savings in this budget, the reserves feel to me, vehicle reserves feel to me like something that we could latch onto to say, look, otherwise, in a year where we could afford to do this, we should run up these reserves and we shouldn't be borrowing, we should be using reserve funds for these things. But, I'm just throwing it out there as an idea if we feel as though we need to have some kind of significant savings recommended back to the select board, that these vehicle reserves, equipment reserves may be a way to do that, as much as I hate to do it. Just
no,
throwing that out for the consideration of the group. I don't have a motion, it's just,
I definitely think it, like you said, especially this year where we're trying to get anything as with the last 2 years that have been pretty aggressive budget hikes.
yeah.
I think it's just hard. If anything, if we wanted to change, trying to think of how I want to phrase it. The consumption of the vehicles is going to be at the same rate throughout. So if we decrease our reserve funding this year, next year we're going to be behind the eight ball
that's right.
still. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
way more next year.
If our goal is to maybe lessen the impact to the taxpayer this year, then we could always suggest more or less use of the unassigned fund balance, which we didn't even really talk about, which we can towards the end, I think. I'm more for feeling a little bit of that pain and keeping the reserves in there just so we can maintain that as a priority. If anything, I don't know as we necessarily need to cut a cruiser by any means, but at some point maybe we start to stretch out our vehicle useful lives.
Yeah. That would be my question. Is what's the impact if we, can we get another year out because we can't afford it this year? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, right.
Just as a point of history is that a couple of years ago, we made a very conscious decision to try and sell the vehicles just under 100,000 because of the sort of catastrophic shelf that the value does off.
It's the cliff.
Or we keep it around and give it to Glenn.
Well, and this is the way, where we are with the funding the reserve at the same time as using the purchase. We're at that point a lot closer than Public Works. We had that conversation about Public Works where how do we get away from, or how do we put in as much as we are funding? We're about 3 years away or so, no, not even 2 or 3 years away from being able to do that in this budget. So that's largely why I left the reserves in, because I thought, geez, we're so close. And if we can get to that point in 2 or 3 years, we're gonna be so much further.
And that point that you're
That was
referencing is being able to just buy the vehicles outright
Yeah.
when we do it and not be leasing them.
Well, at least be funding as much as we're using. So we're sort of ahead of whatever our cost is.
Right, so you wouldn't have a separate line for a purchase, because the purchase you'd have the money for the purchase
Yeah,
in the
money
reserve.
for reserve. Right.
But you need 3 more years to get to the point where we could get to that.
Yeah. That's why it's like.
I'm sure the budget won't be higher in 3 years.
Unless
It'll
the
be
whole
fine.
thing, yeah. Right.
This is the peak.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
All downhill.
all downhill from here.
It's tempting. But
How about the extra police officer that they want? And that comes back again to, I think I asked, where's the chief?
He's watching.
Oh, okay.
He's waiting for something.
He's watching you, Helen.
Well,
But I can
I
ask
asked
the
him
question.
last time, is what was the overtime savings? If we had another officer for this mid-shift,
Yeah,
then how much is he saving? Do you want it cost for the officer, and what do they pay for overtime? And I think he answered that fairly well, but I don't recall what his answer was. And then, of course, we are authorized with Camden, so how many times have we had to call on a Camden officer to fill in over here?
I think one important thing to note is this last year was a little bit of chaos
yes.
with personnel in and out of the department, leaving, joining. I think now we are at least fully staffed. We also added a position last year, so we haven't even been a year fully staffed.
Barely 6
To
months.
to get numbers that we can go off that would be reputable,
Okay.
I
So
just think
what
that
he's
would be hard.
saying in the explanation here about need a mid-shift officer, cover vacations, court, and so on. We've got a new person from last year who's doing that, or is hoped to do that?
3 days of the week, 3 of their 4 days, they're able to do that.
Okay.
The idea would be to have an additional person who could shift into that role where, oh my gosh, somebody's sick and they're not gonna be able to make their shift. Okay, I'll come in a little bit later and then pick that up. That way we're not bringing someone else in that we have to pay overtime to. We're able to sort of shift things around. But then when things are normal, and in 3 years of having a police department this is the first time I've had a town or a police department, nothing's ever normal. But when they are normal for a split second, that's when you can get ahead of some of these other duties that we're asking of these mid-shift officers, whether they're administrative, whether it's, Tony's here in the back of the room, he's our ACO, he's got a whole bunch of other responsibilities. So there's other duties that we put on the back, when we were working one person without that overlap, it's a much harder burden on that single officer who's the only person working in our town at that time. It's a big burden. And they're doing a great job in spite of that.
Yeah.
So just a clarifying question. I don't see overtime broken out in here in dollar terms. Is there, that may be a data point that would be helpful for the committee to have. I don't want to create a ton of headaches if that's.
We were so understaffed this year. When I looked at it in January, we'd spent $120,000 in overtime.
Right.
But we also had 3 vacancies.
Right.
So the net, it's actually net good to us.
Right, because we're not
Horrible
paying.
to the officer.
Yeah.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, when we get to points like this where we have to assess, are we paying enough overtime that justifies another position? Like, we don't have that data point to work with, and it may be, even if it's on a separate box in here that says here's overtime versus.
Yeah, see the average per officer.
Something.
Since we've been fully staffed, I've dramatically seen the overtime decrease.
Okay.
I think the trouble really comes into them getting their paperwork done, having somebody in-house to do the criminal investigations
right.
that our lieutenant's now doing. Things of that sort, where the officers that are on shift are on the road. So
Right.
in order for them to get their reports and stuff done, it's a hindrance to them being on the road.
No, I agree. All I'm saying is having the data in the budget document would be helpful.
But it sounds like you're saying it's probably not an overall savings we're probably not going to spend more on overtime this year than we would on a.
No, like
Yeah.
we've done some details for the dispatch center, but those are accounted for separately. Like the last 4 weeks, there's been no overtime.
Right. And it
So-
presumably doesn't eliminate all overtime either.
Right, if you have somebody at training or somebody at sick, something like that, you'll have some overtime, but not a lot.
I think to me, the biggest benefit, having gone through what we went through this fall, is to have that one person, you're one person further away from calamity. I think that's really because of that small department issues that we have, where, there's a couple departures and an injury, and then you're really thrown in chaos. I think to me, that's the huge benefit of that, is you can resemble yourselves at the end of the day, hopefully. I think And the other part of this is, we talked a little bit more about this last year, so this is maybe old news for everyone who's been here, but for you guys, for the new folks, it's a little bit. You know, when you do hire somebody who is, you know, before they go to the academy, obviously they're able to do some work, but largely they can't work by themselves. And then you pay their time when they're at the academy, and then you're covering, you know, so you're always sort of one shift, or one position away from wherever you really want to be at all times. And that was some of the conversation last year, for somebody who may remember. We were talking about trying to get to a 6th position, adding that 6th position, because that really means you have 5. And so I somewhat look at this as somewhat that same league of saying, we really need 6, but you almost have to add a 7th to make sure that works. That some of that you can play with, like overtime rates, and try to say, how do you put that together? Maybe you can make that work. In some cases it does, but not always. So
Yeah.
I agree with Chief's position of saying, you know, let's not assume we should do victory laps because we've got 6 officers and wahoo. But there's a longer term, and in terms of the stability of the Rockport Police Department, looking at potential retirements, looking at the world that can happen to us. I think he's just letting us all know, the board, myself, and all of you, let's not rest our laurels there. We need to be mindful of what could be and how we could maybe benefit our overall operation with that other position.
Yeah, I still want the overtime data.
There is
It would be helpful to have, that's all and I don't want to make this binder any thicker, but that does feel
Well,
like a.
There is some overtime figures in the performance measures. It's broken down by officer.
Got it.
So for fiscal year ending 21, we were spending about $8,800 per officer. And so far for 25, we spent $30,567 per officer.
Yeah, which, wow, accords with your January number you threw out, I think, multiply it, right? Yeah, I mean, I personally find the arguments for an officer compelling, but I agree with your assessment that this year it's tough to swallow, I think.
I mean, I think some of it too, for me at least, is we just added a position last year.
Right. Let the dust settle. And
Let's figure out and see if that even worked first.
Yep.
To see how that changed our numbers.
But this is also one of those situations where the conversation, the dialogue that you guys have is really helpful and impactful for the board, myself, and Chief, because he's going to hear this, and whether it's in the budget prep this year or we're in the middle of a situation, and generally this group felt positive towards the concepts of something or whatever that may be. That can lead to how we manage these situations because obviously we have to run these departments after you all stop your work. So we're listening, we're hearing you, and I think if a great officer showed up and there's we haven't spent much in overtime and there's a that seems to make sense, then the board will tell that's the time when you talk about it and why these discussions are fruitful in my mind.
it's also the old regionalization topic.
There you go. There you go. That's what we won't solve tonight.
Right, yes.
He said he could do it in a day.
He
Yeah,
did a
that
day,
day, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hold him to that.
Hold him to it.
Okay, any other questions on the PD department? Or I should say the police department.
Redundancy of Ds.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move along. Starting with the fire department, or not, continuing on with the fire department, 403, paid 177. And this budget is just the fire department. This doesn't include any other departments, just fire. Any questions on fire?
Clay,
Yes, ma'am.
under the capital items, the turnout gear reserve, those are just new reserves to build up to when we actually need the stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I think in somewhere you said there's a lot of the gear that's aging out, that sort of thing?
Yes, Yes, more or less. Long story short, yeah. And the point of it is, like we talked about, having reserves so that when the time does come, we're not adding any swings to the budget.
Right.
Similar with, what we've done with the SCBA reserve prior.
If you need one set of gear this year,
And you're in the
you
need.
buy one set of gear. If you need 3 next year, hopefully the reserve is built up enough so you can sustain
Right,
that.
right.
And that way it gives chief flexibility to make the best purchase he can, and based upon the volunteers or whomever he has on staff.
That's your idea of getting reserves.
I'm sure that it's based on something. How did we come up with the reserve numbers for the turnout gear and things? What was that based on?
2 sets?
Chief?
Yeah.
2 sets? 20,000?
What the
or
reserves
2
that we
sets?
came up with for the turnout gear,
10 years.
and what else was it?
Yeah, come sit.
Yeah.
No,
Loud,
just
because of the
stomp.
stomping. Yeah, you can stomp us.
I don't want to stomp, that'd be rude.
Have a seat.
They said it's fun watching at home, the camera's just bouncing.
Yeah, bouncing wicked.
Sorry, so one set of turnout gear, to fully equipped boots, pants, jacket, helmet is $6,000 now. So gear, unfortunately, has a 10-year life expectancy for any interior firefighter, so after 10 years, they can no longer use that. So that would be to fully outfit 3 fully firefighters.
Every year.
Yes. We bought 2 already this year.
And theoretically, if we have 30 people on the roster,
We have 28
We've got
on there
10
right
year.
now.
10-year turnover.
Okay.
So the problem is, it's like our air pack, or our bottles for the air packs. The bottles now are $1,100 a piece. We have 52 bottles. So if we didn't buy a couple every year, they're only good for 15 years. In 15 years, we'd have to come up with $52,000 to replace all the bottles at once. So
Right.
we're trying to do 2 bottles every year, a couple sets of gear every year. The stuff that expires or has an expiration date, we're trying to spread it out now, where it used to be all one lump sum. So we're trying to do a little bit every year so that we're not losing all of our equipment in one time and having a bigger price tag.
Right. I was just wondering, like, is it based on so much each year? When you came up with the $20,000, what are you basing that on? I was just wondering what you based
Yep.
them on. It's just to keep
Unfortunately.
getting them.
I mean, just our bunker pants and jacket alone now are $3,600. I could hear him, Jeff.
Yeah. But you're not at home.
Oh, Jason's right at home here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Quick question for Megan on the capital items. The top box on this is page 180. Top box has the same figures going down between the department head and manager, yet the subtotal's different.
Yeah, the formula on the total or department head didn't work. It's not
Okay.
working correctly. They're the same.
All right.
They're both 404,979. Right, Kim?
That's correct.
Okay. Kim caught that one.
Kim caught that one.
Yeah.
Good job, Kim.
Too bad it wasn't the smaller number.
I know. I wish. Yeah, I know.
The 6.6.
Try harder, John. Jeez.
I guess same question on the vehicles. Is there any room to save a little bit of money this year? I mean, not that any of us want to do it, but. or am
The
I-
difference with this budget versus the other ones is that the reserve is actually funding our lease payment.
Right, yeah, I see that roughly washes.
Yes, we have increased the reserve deposit slightly just because the vehicles unfortunately are getting much
Right.
more expensive
Right.
than they used to be.
I see.
In the next couple of years too, we should have a few years where we won't have any
Right.
new vehicles coming on.
5 years.
Oh, nice.
So we should have 5 years of building a reserve. I mean, we're still gonna have the lease payments, but if we can fund our reserve too, then.
Right.
Is that
I
why we
guess-
see the actual repair charges go up or the repair budget go up because the age of them?
No, the technology, if you have to fix something in them, we replaced the turbo in engine 23 last year and it was almost $15,000 just for a turbo. And we just replaced the DEF fuel system in the squad, which is only 6 years old. It's the tank for the DEF fuel with the sensor, and that was $4,000. So unfortunately, fixing
this type of equipment is way more advanced than the 1986 truck. If you had to fix that, it's minimal. Now it's all technology and the price goes through the roof.
It's getting harder for our local mechanics to work on the equipment, if you know any good ones.
We should keep old equipment.
Anybody got an 86 truck laying around that we can get our hands on it?
Clay's got it. He bought the last one.
Oh, yeah? Make him an offer you can't refuse.
Is there a situation with the large apparatus where, like John Deere, makes it impossible for their farmers to fix it, that it has to be a registered dealer?
It doesn't necessarily have to be a registered dealer, but they've got to have the software to be able to communicate with the vehicle, which, yeah, I mean, you need more than just a big equipment over-the-road truck software. You need basically emergency vehicle software as well.
I mean, the big problem too is there's hundreds of mechanics for your typical equipment around here, but there's only a few fire truck companies that do the work, and it's not just fixing, you know, Clay could probably put the DEF tank in, but then you have to run the software and do tests on the truck, which he's not certified to do. So our trucks every year have to go get recertified, they have to get pump tested, all of that, every single year. And I mean, the trucks, our squad that we have, 25, we paid $600,000 for that 5 years ago, and Rockland just purchased the same exact truck for $900,000. And it's 3 years before they get it.
And don't forget the tariffs.
And that's prior to tariffs.
Yeah, tell a story about the tariff with the truck, the brush truck.
The mini pumper we ordered a couple years ago, comes from Canada CET. They had a couple weeks left on it. The company is out of Montreal. We bought it through the company we buy our fire trucks through, but the company building it. To beat the tariff that was coming, the increase would have been $52,000 increase, not on us. So CET sent the truck over today from Montreal with the 2 technicians to stay in Brunswick at the place that we deal with for the next week and a half, 2 weeks to finish the truck here in the U.S. To beat the tariffs.
Nicely done.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say there was some kind of like movie thing where we were going to sneak across the border and steal the truck.
Yes, exactly.
In the dark of night, something like that. I mean, that's what I was
That might have
waiting
been
for.
part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a challenge? I mean,
Canadian bacon. Hey.
Just to make sure I understand, and it seems like the reserve, back to the reserves, that we're really funding next year's lease payment with it, in a sense, right? Because it looks like we have $250,000 in that reserve, which if you take the 174 lease purchase out of it, still leaves you with some cash. I mean, again, the last thing I want to do is impoverish our, vehicle replacement budget, but
It's really for when you get up like further into the
right.
replacement schedule. So right now we're spending 173 by 27, 28.
Right.
It's estimated to be 208.
Right.
I mean, I think that we'll need to update some of these principal amounts too, based on what Jason just said about the fire truck that
Yeah.
Rockland ordered. I mean, we have a fire truck in here for $675,000. I don't think there's any way we're gonna be buying a fire truck for $675,000.
Probably not even if it's
Unless a
another mini
miracle
bumper.
happens.
probably by then.
Okay, any other questions for the fire department? Okay, moving on to EMS. You don't go too far there, chief. Emergency Medical Services, Department 405, page 187. Getting into that first full budget year coming up. Fully staffed budget year, at least I should say.
Yeah.
Any questions on that? Comments, concerns? I do notice we're not contributing to the vehicle reserve right now, but I'm assuming at some point, we probably ought to start that down the road. I know we got some money for the ambulance, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit of a tricky circumstance with that, the investment funds, but, I think that's right. I think partly my thought was before we started looking ahead, get our feet under our ground, you know, on this, with this department, and, you know, get our revenues straight, get everything sort of organized, and before we think about the future. Right now, the future is tomorrow. When we start rolling out, you know, for the first time for transport, so,
Is tomorrow the day?
yes.
0700.
First customer gets a mug.
That doesn't
Gets a
mean
free
you-
hat.
Hat and a t-shirt.
No photos until you're ready.
And a pen. We'll do a goodie bag.
Just ignore that. We don't want people driving into things so they can get free t-shirts.
7:01, I'm ready.
The things people will do.
We don't
Things
want them to
people
want
do
to
for free
transport
t-shirts.
either.
People run, you know, marathons to get t-shirts.
This is probably a good place for us when we think about the systemic changes. This is a good place for us to touch base and look at the numbers like 6 months in,
Yep,
just to get a sense for how things are shaping
yeah.
up.
In terms of revenues.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, the
Yeah.
revenues,
Yep.
The revenues.
the 60 grand and how confident you guys are that that's gonna be.
The contract was signed, John signed his portion of it today, we've sent it back to Comstar to get that hopefully rolling sooner than later, so.
I asked the question before as far as billing. Who's doing the invoicing?
Comstar, it's a company that most every agency in this area uses.
Okay. They bill,
They do all of it. We literally,
what's the turnover on the money?
I don't know if I can answer that.
It's probably gonna depend on the insurance carrier, whether the claims approved the first time or it's submitted for more, resubmitted back to us for more information, so then it has to go through the cycle again. I would imagine that it's probably gonna be anywhere from 30 to 90 days, depending on how that process goes.
I didn't know, I'll be more specific. Are they one of these companies that at the first of the month, they send you a check for everything that, the month before? How often?
Yes, they will send it monthly.
Okay.
Can you remind
I
me-
can get this, my paramedic supervisor who's dealing with all this is actually on duty, so I can get the answer for you and get back to you.
I was just curious as to, you know, is it a check that, while we don't know what the health insurance is going to reimburse, is it something that we're going to know on the 1st or the 15th of every month that we are going to be receiving?
They will send us
funds?
claims reports that tells us how much of the claim was paid, how much of the billed claim wasn't paid, or if the claim was denied altogether. They'll also send us reports if it's patient paid, so they didn't have insurance. And then we can either follow up with them if they're a Rockport resident and can't afford it, or they will process our collections for us as well.
And here in our office, over wherever, what staff do we have? Who's taking over the, you say that they're gonna let us know who did this, who on our end is going to
The
be?
paramedics will submit the claims.
So what happens, we get back from an EMS call right now, the paramedic does their report, so they have to type up, it's a very lengthy EMS report. When they're done, they click it and they hit enter and it goes immediately to Comstar. That's all we do.
Okay, on our end, Comstar's paying us. Who on our end is checking to make sure that we're getting reimbursed for everything? Who's doing the double check? Who's doing the audit on that? Is that,
That's the paramedic supervisor, he will look at the monthly reports and check. Unfortunately, we can bill, but that doesn't mean we're gonna get paid, depending on insurance, so we can only go so far. That's what this company Comstar does.
yeah,
They handle that portion of it.
okay.
But we can appeal if they don't.
I just saw that. You can appeal up to so many different times. Was it just the very bottom?
That's the hardship waiver. But that's,
Collection steps, take one after another, report bad debt. I think they only do it up to third bill balance. Is that correct? They do it up to 3 times.
Okay, so if you've got
And then the
one,
fee, if you push for further than that, then our fee, the 20% we pay could go to 25%. So you have to pay more to have them spend more time looking for the funds.
so if insurance company A says no, we can go back and say,
Well, they go
maybe.
back and.
They go back 2 more times.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's not different cases where things aren't being paid, it's one case, they go after it 3
Correct.
times. Okay, so, I'm just thinking, if some insurance company decides, I'm not gonna approve anything, and then you got 5 or 6
Right.
things that they haven't approved.
Well, I mean, there is a collections process
Okay.
where you can, gets reported to the collection bureaus, and obviously, we don't wanna see that, obviously,
Absolutely.
because we don't want our residents to be in the whole medical debt world is something that, nobody wants to be living in. There is, some thought that these funds that we're talking about could be part of that solution, these investment funds, but more on that to come, because we still have to work those details out, but I think the idea is that, we don't want Rockport residents in particular who are already being asked to support the startup of this thing. We don't wanna see them in a bad way. There's another section of the collections, which are for the traffic accidents that are for non-Rockport residents. We have it in the fire department side, we also have it here in terms of the collections that we can receive. We can submit to their car insurance, what have you as well. So there's a couple different avenues, but to me, the most important thing is, in terms of our startup, what we're being asked to do is really, we're asking paramedics to be paramedics, to do their run reports, to keep track of what they did on their call. And we're working with a contractor to ensure that the collections of that, we don't want to do our own billing. There are other agencies who have tried to do their own billing, and it's a complete disaster and blows up in their faces 10 times over. So,
When Camden First Aid was here 11 years ago,
Yep.
they had 2 people specifically, that was their job.
Yeah, I remember that.
not a great
I
idea.
mean, same thing, if we push past the 3, then we would have to start doing our own collections,
Yep.
paying someone to do all that work. And, I mean, if you've gone 3 attempts, how much time and money and effort are you gonna spend?
And 6%, they keep 6%, so which is the industry
that's
standard
fair.
in this area.
Yep.
So I think for where we are right now, it's a good starting point, and I think as we're talking about 6 months from now, we're all gonna know a lot more.
Seems well worth it.
Yeah.
So quickly on that theme of knowing more, I'm looking at the performance measures that you've got in here. I mean, this was, as you know, a sizable investment for the town. The argument was made that, response times will improve and quality, I don't know how we, however we define the quality of the care, presumably health outcomes would improve because we're providing a better service. Do you have, I mean, for performance measures, there's operating costs, there's a number of service calls, there's community outreach programs. Are there other metrics that you're keeping that would be good for the town to see, so they could say, here are the improved outcomes, the improved response times? How are you guys thinking about communicating, measuring that, and communicating it back to a community that just made a substantial investment in this program?
So our system keeps track of all of our run times and
Okay.
everything of that nature, so we don't have a baseline on
Right,
the
right, I
numbers.
understand
I can't really compare what Northeast, I mean, we could get into that, I don't wanna go down that road. But we are gonna have a baseline over the first 6 months, as Carl mentioned. We will have a report that comes out with our average run
Okay.
time, our response time, everything that will be laid out, and that'll be a baseline for us at that point. Financials, again, it's hard to get a baseline because we just had our startup costs. There was a lot of extra expenses that we did not anticipate because there was supposed to be an extra ambulance available to us. Unfortunately, another company was involved in an accident that was demolished. That loaner has been purchased by them, so that's the reason we had to take on the second ambulance. So there's stuff that we did not plan on incurring on that. So it's all going to be a baseline. I mean, there's nothing. We're trying to compare against a private company that does business much different than any other municipality.
Right.
It's hard to compare apples and oranges, I guess, kind of.
I understand.
But I would say those performance measures, particularly in our first year and the first handful of years as we start up and it's a helpful piece for all of us to make sure that it's a good gut check for ourselves. payer mix, some of them are billing related, some of
Yeah.
it's, uncollectible debt, some of it's, average response time. I think there's a whole host of metrics that we could probably plug in here that would be really helpful. Certainly always open for options and suggestions, and I think, John mentioned some of that when we were talking about with the select board. I think the more we can dial those in and make people aware of, okay, this is how we're performing, because there is a part of this where, from a fire department perspective, it's about, we're gonna give the best quality of care to this individual, bar none. Stop everything. If I think of the meme of the car that's parked in front of the fire hydrant, and the fire department went through the windows of the car to hook up the like, that's a fire department mentality. We're gonna do whatever we can to save your, and that's the effort that's going into this, is to try to make sure we're doing everything we can for Rockport's residents.
I love that that's the example you use.
I think it's perfect.
We're gonna
one.
smash the windows out of your car to get
Absolutely,
the
you should be there
I
anyway.
understand that it's a funny visual.
It's
to
a
say,
funny visual,
This
right?
is what we're doing.
That's
Damn.
right.
Yeah.
But you have to. The car should be there, right?
No, that's true.
But
That's true.
but the point being, like, we have to find a way to show that this is something that not only how we're doing that, for ways for people who are not on the scanner or who are not part of it, because those of us who aren't as familiar with it, we don't know. We don't know what those. We live our quiet little lives and hope we never have to call, right? But we need to be able to, oh, okay, yeah, so wow, the time's better, or we've gotten better at this or that or the other. I think that's a good thing for all of us to be able to
Well,
know.
and I think this goes to the long-term discussion is, the performance metrics in here are okay for the most part. I do think as these budgets continue to climb and the pressure continues to mount on these budgets, we're gonna have to have probably better data across the board in town government to say this is how we're, these are how we're responding, the type of quality, cost per $1,000 assessment. Okay, you can track that over time, but I think if the budgets continue the way they're going, the pressure to share with the community, this is why you're getting these better services. Particularly as we talk about, the mowing contract is too much, so now we're gonna do mowing, we're gonna hire somebody to do mowing. As we continue to do, and we had a lot of discussions about that, adding police officers, at some point, we've got to go back to the community and say, these are the performance outcome measures that we're tracking that say, these were the right decisions from a public policy point of view to do this.
Yep, I agree with you.
And a good chance to start here with a brand-new program where we can set a baseline
And if
and
there's
sort of
specific
rethink that.
performances that people want, I need to know what people want to see, too.
Right.
We could come up with probably 500 a
No,
year,
that's right.
but people don't want to see
No,
500.
we don't wanna see it either, yeah.
What are the key 5 or whatever
Right,
you're looking
that's
for?
right.
If you can give us that, then we can narrow it down, and I think that will be a big help on whatever the group wants or whoever wants it. If you give us what, we'll do it. I just don't have anything to give you right now.
I'll call you tomorrow. after the
Tomorrow
first
at
day. We'll see how
7:01.
it goes, yeah. We'll see how it
It's
goes.
0.
Plus, you can read all about it in the December townwide bulletin.
Right.
If it comes out.
November, but okay, yes, that's.
We'll see.
Pokey, pokey. All right, anything else on EMS? All right, other public safety services. 407, page 193. Streetlights, fire hydrants.
Oh my.
Any questions, comments, concerns there?
I'm just happy to live in a town where each street, stoplight gets its own line item budget.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yes.
I grew up in Penobscot, at least you got traffic lights.
That's right.
Street lights, whatever, street lights.
All right, moving on, animal control. Department 409, page 199.
Tony, you want to come up? No, I'm just kidding. Safe place to be back there, yeah. Dangerous up here.
Okay, pretty abbreviated, any Any questions on that? Proposed changes. All right, the Harbor, Department 411, page 205.
Excuse me.
Comments on the Harbor? Any changes in expenditures or revenue? I know we had talked about changing rates on some of the revenue for storage. I personally don't have enough to go off there for info, but
What do we charge for storage?
Come on up, Abby.
Hey, Abby.
Thank you for
I didn't want you to come for nothing.
Yeah?
Yeah, right, good.
Almost able to duck up there.
We charge $2.50 a square foot. So, but for square foot for boats, it's length times beam, but then for floats, we do the full gamut of square footage. So length times beam times height. If my
What are
math
the other
is right.
What are the other boatyards in the area charging?
Just about. It's roughly the same, if not. We went up quite a bit. We were $2 when I first started. Let's just, for instance, it was $1 a linear foot, which was just robbery.
Yes.
Thievery. Robbery. We weren't robbing. They were thieving. Anyway, it was just
It wasn't
ridiculous.
enough, let's
Yeah, it
just
wasn't
say.
enough.
Okay.
So now, and then it was $2 a linear foot, and then we're like, well, that doesn't really take up the volume. So let's go to. So it's roughly, we don't offer any amenities that boatyards do either.
Right.
So we're not offering power, water. It's the dirt.
What do you do about, what do we do about shrink wrap? Is that each person on their own? Do we
That's
provide
on their
that
own.
service?
They have to provide jack stands and, maintaining the jack stands as well, which some people forget.
And plus you have a definite timeout.
Yeah,
They have
yep,
to be
June
off.
1st is the hard
Yeah.
deadline. It used to be
Splash.
July 1st, which was way too late. And now we have the Donut Festival to think about, so June 1st.
Do you do any type of cross-check or anything to make sure that, I don't even know if you can, that boats are paying their excise tax?
Yes, we do. Yep, we require proof of excise with mooring registration. So that's what sort of I'm going through now is all the people that have paid their online mooring but have not proven the proof of excise. So I say, when we see that, then I'll approve your.
What if I have a private dock and I'm not paying for mooring? How do you know if I'm paying my excise tax or not?
Yeah, that is.
Do we go out looking, do we go out looking for the stickers?
We do not go out looking for the stickers. Nope, not many.
Is that money that we get or the state gets?
We get it.
Yep. I mean, it could be something, it's not something that I don't look out for, but it's just so much that, most of I'll say that is, I don't even know of an instance that a person has a dock without a mooring. I don't think there is. I was just gonna say, I can't think of any that don't also have a mooring that need to register with the, and a couple people get through with the non-excisable boats
Right.
under 21 feet that don't have an engine and all that.
I'm just looking to see if there's
Yeah, there's
anybody
any way.
out there
Oh
that
yeah,
we could
no.
get a couple more
Yeah.
bucks.
Yeah, and
We have a lot of boats out there.
that has been right, and I think in the last several years since we've gone to the online mooring program, I think that's gotten better. I think we've, I don't know if we're in the rates, but I definitely know that we're making sure those boxes are checked, and that if a boat spends more than 175 days here, that they are due to pay excise somewhere in the state. So they don't have to pay it. They could pay it in the town that they live in, but I try to highly, it's like, well, your boat's in Rockport, pay it in Rockport.
It's right up the hill.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Tie-offs, I assume those are the people that just come in for the day to get their mast steeped or,
Nope. The actual tie-offs are the dinghy tie-offs. So the actual lines that, take up a lot of extra space.
what do you charge for somebody who's coming in to get their mast put on or?
We charge. I mean, we have a 1 hour free of dock space, and then we charge $10 an hour after the first additional hour. So if people come in and do that, Johansson Boatworks, say, comes in and does work on their boat, they will pay a per hour charge. Or if they put their boat overnight, they'll pay an overnight charge. And same with anybody that's leaving their boat on the
So
dock
that's
for
an
work.
overnight docking would be,
Yes, yep, the overnight, yep. And then the overnight dockage is also where we get the daily rate of dockage. That's just straight up dockage. It's a little misleading. And we are doing things to, capture more revenue. We're going to have a Square QR code that we'll actually put on a sign at the dock, so that when people are like coming to go to 18 Central for dinner and they leave, and they would call, and I'd say, see that yellow cash box down by the ramp? Like, can we give you some money? And I'd say, like, I could send them a Square invoice, which was easy, but it would be really easy if they could just, get the QR code, pay us some money, or when they're doing the launch ramp, they don't have to have cash. So that's something we're gonna implement as well.
and, the guys that put the masts in and out, what are they called?
Skyhook?
Skyhook.
Mm-hmm.
What's their fee right now to?
That's the harbor lease. They're in that sort of ambiguous section of harbor
Well,
lease.
they
They do have their own.
$12.75.
$12.75.
What's their number?
$1,275.
No, it's
You mean?
the
Our
third
line
one from
number.
the
What's,
bottom.
what number?
R 833.
Third one up from the bottom.
Oh, okay. And that has not gone up?
It just really established. So that was
Established.
really the first year
Okay.
that it was in place. So
Yeah.
it'll have it'll have a escalating clause, I would imagine. John? I mean, perhaps, but we're looking.
I remember this one.
No
had
comment.
So they
Yeah, sorry. That's-
Is
No
it a yearly
comment.
contract, or did it have a period of time? Does it renew every year?
That lease does renew every year. It's
Yeah.
not a.
I think it's something that the harbor strategic plan should be looking at.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know.
And the location of the, is that the best
Location.
place for it? Is that the best use of the space?
Yeah, because
Or
they,
the
I know,
safest.
they'll come in and they'll say, yeah, we'll do your mast at 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring your boat down at 7, you've got to wait, and then they don't show up, and then
Then it, yeah,
it gets,
yeah.
how do you figure out how much somebody's going to get charged if,
The cameras are really helpful with that, actually. They keep people really honest.
yeah. Well, no, I'm just thinking of the person who's sitting there waiting for Skyhook to show up.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying not to be too draconian about it. If there's empty dock space and someone's sitting on the dock, and we're not, it's not as if I'm going to have a chalk stick and say, okay, your time's running out. But if people, you'd like to think that people will come and say, hey, I need a couple hours on the dock. Okay, it'll be $25 if you want, 2.5 extra hours. And otherwise, we just try to, maintain our vigilance of trying to enforce the dock use.
And does Skyhook sort of have a reserved section? Because I know they usually do.
They have their
Different.
own dock.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So
that
are
they-
people
that they-
charged for docking at Skyhook's dock?
No. Nope. That's their.
And is it marked as Skyhook so that everybody
Yeah, it's
knows?
really thin. It's not the most desirable. Nobody would go in there thinking that that's where you should be going without being told. Yeah. I mean, we've never had that problem before.
Well, the reason I'm asking is my son is finally going to get his boat in the water again this
Oh.
year.
Yeah.
So I want to.
Well, we can chat about it. I'll give you the lay of the land.
Where to go?
Yeah. Let me know.
Okay.
Well, I think to your point, it seems like some of the revenues can be reviewed as part of a larger strategic plan, but
Yeah.
not
Which
so.
is being, yeah.
I do seem to remember Skyhook having a rather robust lobby when this was last discussed.
Indeed.
Just impressive.
Indeed. A lot of
Impressive
fans.
witnessing across the street.
A lot of fans.
Yeah.
A lot of fans. And they do great. They're, I would say, I'd speak on behalf of what the service they provide.
Yeah.
They do provide a great service, and they're providing something that few other people do. So, to be a full-service harbor, there's a lot of things you have to do. That's not necessarily through us, but
Right.
I think the balance of what does the town provide for services, what does it support for others to be able to provide their services? What's the right balance of private versus public on public space? And you're going to be asked as a community to potentially do more to make sure that space is still there in 30, 40, 50, 100 years. those are all things that need to go into that pot, that group is, gonna be working over.
Yeah, and a plug for
Abby
tomorrow
gets to
night,
work on it.
5 p.m.
That's right.
Upstairs. Yeah, right. I could get it in there.
Yes.
We are having a meeting for and just the first meeting of like public input meeting of what we're looking at for years to come, and what people hope to include and maybe not include, and yeah.
No stopping.
Yeah, no stopping.
Yeah, no stopping. We'll be upstairs.
Okay, any other questions on the harbor? Okay, moving on to EMA.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Department
Abby.
440, page 217. Not a whole lot of meat on the bone to pick at there. Any questions?
Still rolling?
Okay, carrying on. Public Works. Department 500, page 225.
It's a pretty small budget, not much. to
Yeah,
talk about here.
Pretty consolidated here.
Yeah, consolidated, yes.
What does this 82% mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I think my biggest thing here is just to wonder if we should be, wonder if we're on a decent track for, or should set up for a vehicle reserve. Again, we don't have one right now, so I don't know if necessarily this is the year to do it, but I think that might be something to work for next year with a plan going into the budget cycle to have a reserve set up, just like we do with most every other department. So we can all be on the same page and start to use more of a blanket procedural theory or idea to all the departments, especially with vehicles.
I wonder if that's like a phased approach where you look at certain types of equipment first. That, maybe there's a way to get there is to, I mean, because that's a big bite, right, Clay?
It is, absolutely, yep.
But, you sort of piecemeal it to start to at least get some victory there somehow, because to get to $300,000, a reserve that would expend $300,000 a year would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think my reasoning for doing stuff like that is because down the road at that point,
Yeah.
when you get to that point, you also alleviate any sort of constraints on the rest of your budget. So if
Right.
you are not having lease payments, you aren't having a guaranteed line item that you have to pay.
Yeah.
So if you can say, well, we can stretch it out a year, now
Right.
you although you'd still want to contribute to that reserve, you can also use that flexibility for saying, well, let's see our savings in real time, push this out a year, push this vehicle purchase out a year, and then we can keep it in the department and we can put a new water crossing in without having to bond it.
Yeah, I got you.
So,
Yep.
it certainly gives you flexibility if nothing else.
Yep.
And that is one of the easiest, best tools to use to cover costs that are dynamic,
I got you. Yep.
especially over equipment that's not as dynamic. We got a pretty fixed cost,
Yeah.
especially when you got leases.
Right.
So if you can change that, it tends to help, I think. But I don't have an actual recommendation. That's for the process that we should talk about later.
I've got a question just about I'm already thinking ahead to next year.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
It's not good, but it's because we don't have any other choice. I'm looking at the big leaps in this budget are like professional services engineering goes from 6,000 to 65,000. Shoulder contracts goes to 66,000 from nothing.
Yeah.
Culverts and drainage, 3,800 to 37,000. Gravel from 6,000 to 41,000. I mean, are we anticipating? Are these one-time costs? Are these costs that we're going to see in this budget going forward? Those kinds of material costs and contract costs, just henceforth?
So.
And also, where were they before?
Yep.
Right.
that they're showing up now.
Yeah.
So those were largely being folded into road construction reserve, in large part. So that's the break that this budget, we talked about the
Yep.
increase in cost of materials and identifying those issues. So that's really what this budget is doing, is saying, okay, we're not just going to say, this is where we think we're gonna be. We're gonna divide, we're gonna drill into that well before we get here, so that when you look at sort of that page with all of the various roads that we're attacking for projects this summer and fall, we're attaching with that, in some cases, those added costs of, okay, we're gonna have 5 culverts, we're gonna have 6 culverts, we're gonna have, you know, that sort of pit on Main Street that I mentioned when Mike came up. You know, that we're gonna plan ahead for those to a far greater degree than we have. And again, in terms of like, what does next year look like? And I think I mentioned this the other night. The roads that we picked here were some of the lighter loads, because I was trying to tiptoe our way into this world as opposed to maybe stomp our way into this world. And so, you know, for example, Main Street would have been in this, in an earlier draft, that section of Main Street would have been in this budget. But we removed it because that $25,000 potential exploration was not something I wanted to get into this year. But next year it will need to, you know, that will be coming at us. So you can get a sense of, in large part, what that next year looks like when you look at that page, that what's below the folder, I suppose, or below what's projected. That does give you a sense of potentially what next year might look like.
On that,
part.
the road list, is that how far into the future? I'm assuming that's not every road we have.
No.
But is
No.
that like 1 year's worth of paving? Or, I mean, I know it depends on how much we budget, but
Yeah.
like in terms of need, I suppose, is that like?
It's largely 2. So
Right.
this is
Which
our given year. This is what next year could be.
Right.
Now, just as we had talked about, we had a road a couple years ago where the fall it looked fine. By the time we get to the budget time, completely different circumstance. So, you know, don't run to the bank with this, or maybe run away from the bank with this. But what we do is we do a 5-year outlook in our capital plan. So next fall, when we come back, you'll see 5 years of roads. But again, it's you know, you're not going to invest the amount of time in terms of, okay, we're going to have 8 culverts versus 6. You may not know that far out. You know, it's really Mike's say-so of his driving around and saying, well, we can wait on this. No, we need to move this up. That's sort of the balance, wouldn't you say, in terms of figuring out where it fits in that, but also the cost. I mean, how long that road is. Russell Avenue is one where it's sort of on the periphery of needing attention pretty soon. There's some drainage issues, there's some sidewalk issues that need to be addressed. So some of those mechanic streets and others where that's one where we probably need to jump into at some point. But to do that requires a much bigger, and so we want to be careful about that and be very thoughtful about it before we're there. Some of these roads are much more straightforward. I mean, Main Street is as straightforward as it gets. You know, it needs a lot of tree work, some ditching, and pave it. When you get in town,
sure,
a little more challenging in the village. Yeah, to deal with those things.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, again, when you're looking at any place you can save money, this is the sort of thing you could scale up or down, right?
Yep.
You know, which you know would pain me. You know, I think that, like it or not, most average laymen, when they're wandering around and comparing towns and roads, are pretty obvious, you know, what judgment of how's this town doing. So, you know, it takes longer to get into the other services, but you know, I guess, you know, we talked about Cross Street. You know, I know you know things. Is there any? I guess my question for the committee, I suppose, is how is it worth trading? You know, we know it's not the right decision from a maintenance perspective, but is it worth trading? You know, deferring 1 or 2 roads to save $100,000 or something. You know, I'm you know ambivalent on that myself. I see both sides very well.
And with like John said, this list is
already
what we're
filtered.
looking at the moment, but in, 2 more weeks, we'll start really
Right.
looking and things
Sure.
could change.
Yeah, right.
How everything lays down.
Yeah.
One of the big things has been keeping the posted roads. I mean, if one cement truck gets on a couple of these roads, it's just gonna wreck it, and that's
Yeah.
been a battle and a challenge.
Sure.
So I think you've identified what historically this committee would do, is like, let's go rob the
Sure, right, yeah.
that department.
Right.
But we always end up getting bit in the ass,
Yeah, I believe
That's a
it.
little bit why we're where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hated, so as a reminder from that night, seemingly 3 weeks ago. So to do what we're asking, we should be paving 38,000 linear
Right.
feet of road in the town on an annual basis. This proposal here is 31,000. So we're already short more than a mile of what we should be doing, a mile and 2/10. Which brings me no comfort, because I'm already biting my own. I don't know how that would work, but it's a real problem that it sets us up for later on. But my sense was, to your question, Steve, was it was more important that we establish that structure in place of how we do this, and making sure that, okay, this is the standard, this is how we do this moving forward, so that everyone understands going forward, this is how we're going to manage and plan for these eventualities. And then, of course, you also have the year ahead. So if you do want to look ahead, you can look to that second section and say, okay, well, yep, we know what's coming at us.
Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? In Public Works. Okay, moving on to sanitation, 501, Department 501, page 239.
This is really Midco Solid Waste, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Any other thoughts on the budget there? Okay. Next department is the library, 601 on page 247. Like to see those gray numbers. Any questions on the library there?
What are we thinking about those parking spots?
Parking's under Public Works.
Right then? We've already thought about them. I was waiting.
We can go back if you want.
Well, no, keep going.
We haven't come too far since there, so wouldn't be a hard U-turn. Okay, any other thoughts on the library? Okay. Moving on to Conservation Commission, Department 602, page 255. Anything on the Conservation Commission? Okay. Moving on to Parks, 603, on page 261. I think in Parks, I would just wonder again, reserves, seem to be stuck on that, but at some point, regardless of what happens with any other parks that might be built in town, I don't ever foresee Walker Park not being Walker Park, so I think it'd be nice to continue to contribute to that. I mean, the only reason I would fight myself on that is because we don't have a specific goal for it, but
Yep.
the goal may be that we still are still going to replace something there. Whether it be a bigger gazebo or a bigger place to play, or a updated place to play. So I think it, again, maybe not necessarily a recommendation, but I think it would be prudent to continue to invest in our reserves and make more where applicable for ongoing scheduled maintenance. Anything else on parks? Anything on mowing in parks?
Goats do a very good job.
Okay. I think moving on past that to the Opera House. Department 604, page 267. Now that our revenue upstairs seemed to have died off
Thank heavens.
for the night. I think it will be interesting to see what the study comes up with, and especially with regards to this building, and see what they might be broadcasting for the future for expenses and what that's going to take to sustain.
I'm a little confused. Line 4110, the sprinkler system, shows the department chair wants 15,000. Managers cut it to 7,500, but there's the explanation on page 273 just has the 15, doesn't say why you cut it. I presume it was just a budget.
I'm hoping it's a good year. Yeah, that's really all it is.
Okay. That's what I
Yeah.
thought.
I'm hoping it doesn't rain. And
Inside.
And it doesn't pour. Yeah.
Didn't some of that get fixed when it went goofy this past winter?
I wish, well, we've had some repairs in there, but by and large, we still have 30-year-old weak pipes.
Not only weak, but scaling on the inside, so that those little bits of rust migrate to the heads, and the heads say, "Oh, you want some water?" Like that.
Not great.
And what was the estimate to fix the whole darn thing?
$350,000.
Ah.
Yeah.
How many lottery tickets have you bought this week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm still a little perplexed by the year-to-date wages figure, and which is, you know, a run rate that, I know I mentioned this previously, but is, you know, half what we budgeted. And I guess my question is, what percentage of this is sort of variable? You know, how much, because, you know, we have the 2 part-time people, I think, right? And then I guess there's some variable. You know, Jeff is, I don't know if you're variable.
There's a variable who hasn't invoiced for a while.
Right, but
A long
that's
while.
dependent
A long
on
while.
the number of events.
And the largest expense personnel-wise we have is our video technician.
Okay, that's helpful.
Sorry, I missed that, I was in the site.
Sorry.
I said the largest expense we have in terms of wages for this department is the video tech position.
Right.
Whether it's
That's-
upstairs running the
Sure.
soundboard and lights, or it's down
Oh,
here
and it's
doing
police
the-
down here. I see.
Right,
That makes sense.
yep.
If only we had some sway with the video technician.
I guess also one of the other questions I was wondering, I mean, I know that 12,000 under line 3090 for the miscellaneous contracts, I believe was just for modern, or was there other contracts
It's
also?
pretty much just modern and any other incidentals that we might have.
So I guess my worry is that isn't gonna be a continued expense, or that is, I feel like if we're spending 12 grand a year, $1,000 a month on services like that, maybe the building is more susceptible than it needs to be to
you know,
generate revenue with?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, we've certainly called around about that service. It's an expensive service. Everywhere you go to find somebody to do monitoring for pests, it's not a cheap endeavor. I think some of the answers to what, you know, sort of what you're bringing up, Clay, though, is what I think will come out when we're talking about overall building condition, too. So I think some of that might be folded in, possibly, voids that need to be filled, or, you know, things like, I mean,
So the goal is to drop that value over time.
the modern
Well,
contract
yeah.
alone, or, well, I mean, yes, but realistically, as long as there are pests,
I mean,
and
we're
that's
not,
the going rate, I mean,
the new fire station's pretty sizable and we haven't budgeted for modern over there. And there's people
it's
living there.
amazing what 130 years does to a building, but you're right, I mean, I think you're right about that, but let's give it time, because these buildings seem to find a way to, also, this is a building that isn't occupied all the time, right? It's more occupied now than it has been, but, you know, when you're in there 24/7, as they will at the fire station, it's a little bit of a different circumstance. I don't necessarily foresee us going down that road forever, but as I said, I think we're gonna know a lot more about what we're asking about a year from now, so I'd rather.
When is that study done? When is it
This
wrapped
summer.
up? Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's, you know, that's gonna be gonna be a big part of what this fall is gonna be about, I think, for both the budget committee and the select board. Talking about where are we going, what's the plan? I mean, bigger than just talking about this aspect of it, but this is one of those canaries in the coal mine, though, that talks about other issues that potentially you could have.
Sure.
How often do we ask for quotes on things like this from other companies?
How often?
Yeah.
Well, this is a service we've only used for 2 years, I think. So it's not something that we've been using for a long time. So the numbers that we're working with aren't that old in terms of when we went out to find them to begin with. But anytime that we're looking for service, we call around. I mean, Glenn, who runs buildings and grounds for us, is he's been working with he's just trying to find people who will do service of any given type. Boiler service, electrical service, plumbing service. That's half his job sometimes, is just trying to find somebody who will do it, never mind what price they're asking. So that's been far greater a share of time than trying to shave nickels than we have been, you know. It just hasn't. It's been trying to find people, particularly over the last 3 years.
Wondered if the town on a whole has a policy of every so many years checking to find out if there's someone else a better price.
Yeah.
Or do we just we're happy with them and we just keep going?
I think every substantial cost that we have that's overseen by a department head or, you know, in a given department, they're always questioning cost and questioning, is there a better way to do it? Does it happen every time they make a purchase or every month we get the bill? No. But it happens far more often than it doesn't happen. I think the larger questions are, you know, how often are there actually other alternatives to the cost that they have? And that's the problem, is there, you know, you have one mowing contractor. We have, you know, one contractor who provides security, you know, our Seco security system, you know, that based in Rockport. We largely have a handful of people who provide earthwork, you know, in the area. Like, we're not in an area blessed with a lot of options where we can fight them off. And in fact, most people who are working are of the mind of, well, if you can get me, great, and if you can't, so what? And that's the attitude of when we're trying to get services done for the town. That's largely why the buildings and grounds piece has worked out so well for us, because we can do Glenn and Matt can go buy a pallet of shingles and they can get something done, rather than going through the rigmarole of trying to work a system that's really not working.
Yep.
I know that's sort of a soapbox complaint, but like, that's realistically what's happening. It's just trying to get things done is the hardest balance of it all. And you know, so when you come here, it's like, oh, there should be all kinds of different pest providers. When we called around, I think Modern was the only one to return our phone call. Now, that doesn't, you know, mean, you know, you stick with them in undying loyalty, but when that something larger than a rat or something larger than a raccoon situation comes up as it did here, you don't wait, you know.
I sent him over here.
Walker, yeah, right. Yeah.
Or something smaller that's gonna degrade the structure of the
Right.
building.
The termites were, yeah, I mean, that was a real
They're
concern.
as or more of a potential problem than furry animals.
That's right, yep.
So this Modern, is the pest control, is it just for this building, 12,000, or is it,
Just here.
do they do any of the other buildings?
Town office. I think town office is the only one, right? We don't have anything with public safety yet. Yeah. It's just the town office, which were the two places we had pest problems. And it's actually different types of pests. We have issues with ants at certain times of the year. We have mice at other times of the year. Knock on wood, they've been able to keep those issues out of the building largely, but these are the things you do when you manage a building with so many people working in them. You've got to keep it clean and safe. So.
Could I ask one more thing about the revenues? You're saying like this filming, is that being billed to the Opera House? Like these sorts of, could I suggest maybe moving it to a different, like to administration or something? Because it seems sort of like if we sold the Opera House, say, and got it off, that expense wouldn't go away.
No.
Right? You know, that's more of a town admin expense. So I think he's sort of inflating, you know, I was surprised to see that we had $120,000 of wages, you know, and I know that there aren't, you know, there's events, you know,
Most
rarely,
of it is
but,
our live streaming.
right, which makes a lot of sense, but, you know, I would suggest moving it elsewhere.
I agree, it's not really an expense to this building, it's an expense to these meetings.
Yeah, it used to be actually broken down by committee, you know,
Right.
The harbor committee would have, picking on them, but, you know. So it got consolidated and
Right.
thrown in.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to create extra work, but if it's as simple as, you know, coding it to a different.
And I see both sides of that. I see what you're saying. Predominantly, Opera House issues are Opera House issues, and if we were looking from some sort of holistic view of, well, this is sort of the home of where everything is, and the future of all this is, you know, sort of unquestioned, it might be one thing. The other challenge is, you know, when other entities are using this space, where will they go? So, you know, we had a meeting room at the town office, that's now office space. So now we're using this space to a greater degree. You know, if there are events that the library wants to put on, where do those costs go? You know, is it rental of Union Hall? Is it, I have no idea, I'm just sort of, you know, spitballing here, but I think that there's something to the sake of, there's a cost, both tangible, there's also a cost of where do we meet, where do we gather as a community. That's a little bit harder but in terms of like this number, I don't know that, I don't know how I feel on it, but I'm just saying in terms of the other side of that equation, there's something we have to talk about how the entire community, well, we have our trainings here, our safety trainings here in this building, like that, there's a value for that in what we do, and if we were somehow, this building no longer existed, we have to find a place to put that, so. Anyway.
And to be sure, you of anybody will see the traffic in and out.
Yes, if there's anyone.
But, I mean, there are a lot of the smaller meetings that have no cost to them at all, because they use the OWL. And even having all the employees in every training is self-sufficient, just using the infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, you'll find me in the Opera House Defense Camp.
I know you will.
I love the Opera House.
Right, but to the point, it actually makes more sense to charge it to committee lines than to charge it to the building it happens to be in. Disconnecting the service from the physical location of it. He's absolutely right. Like I don't know why you would put in the Opera House line
an administrative cost to broadcast a town meeting to the rest of the town. So when you said we used to bill it to this committee, that makes more sense to me than billing it to the Opera House.
If the committee was the select board, who would you bill it to?
Administration.
Would you bill it to
Administration.
administration? Okay, so
Administration,
you're
yeah.
still
Yeah.
saying you
Yeah.
you'd carry that sort of
Yeah, it's not an
idea.
Opera House,
So the
I'll try to say-
programming, but the programming that we would be putting on here, so if we're putting on a contra
Right.
dance or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that. makes
That
sense.
would be a separate, I'm just trying to understand sort of the line
Yeah.
of what you're thinking, okay.
That's what I would
Got it,
suppose.
got
But
it.
like the cameras moved over to the library, you know, when this was out of service, right?
Right,
But
yeah.
presumably we didn't bill it to the library.
Yeah, I get, right, I got you. No, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Okay, any other thoughts on the Opera House? All right, Recreation, Department 606, page 275. I know there's a lot, well, not a lot, but some talk on the reserve on here about that being a dynamic number. Weren't we gonna reconvene with a number on that this week?
Yeah, so I would take that back to the $10,000 number
Okay.
that was proposed and zero out $20,000 in private donations. We're gonna
Under
get
the-
that all,
under
we're
the
able to get this
revenue.
project done in this fiscal year, the basketball court remodel, so we can sort of go back to the same model we did before, which was a $10,000 contribution into the reserve fund
And
over
no
time.
and no revenue?
No revenue, right.
Okay.
So it's a net of $15,000 cut to the budget.
Well, we'll still have the $3,000 revenue, just not the 20,000.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that automatically going to happen, or do we have to make a recommendation to do it?
Well, it's up to you how you want to, I mean, I guess it's, I would say you could make that recommendation and they could accept it. That would make sense. I don't think anyone's gonna argue with it either way, but, yeah.
I guess if I were to ask, as the budget stands right now,
Yeah.
what number is in Megan's computer for as the budget stands right now?
Well, we did move the numbers over, that's true. Yeah, sorry.
Say it again.
45,250.
Okay.
Okay, so we haven't actually changed that number yet?
No.
In your, okay.
So then we need to move to change it to 10,000 and to get rid of the reserve.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that the select board's gonna agree with that. I don't know if it's, I don't know if.
I guess I just wonder about the warrant article on the ballot in terms of
Yeah.
explaining all this when it's, but.
Can we
would obviously-
And that's,
change the
that's,
manager
that's
line?
why,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what I'm
that's why
wondering.
I'm
Could you
asking,
just-
as it stands right
Megan can
now,
just fix it and.
did the select board or manager,
Well, the town
Change
manager
it.
budget has been issued already, so it would have to be changed
Okay.
in the select board budget. Because the town manager budget has gone out.
Well,
Okay.
but when we had our meetings last year, when changes were made in the course of those discussions,
As agreed upon in those meetings, but this isn't one of those meetings.
okay. So the only way to make that change is to do it as a
Either they
recommendation?
trust the select board is gonna make the change, or they make a formal motion to make the change.
Okay, I mean,
But to your point, the formal motion would then appear on the ballot as a
Correct.
recommendation. Yeah, that's not,
it doesn't seem quite right, since
No.
it's based on a donation that
doesn't
came
make
in
sense.
after the fact.
I'm happy
Yeah.
to trust the
we
select
trust
board.
the
trust the
select,
select
we'll
board.
trust you this one time.
Thanks for
There
following.
you go.
I'm trusting you're gonna follow through with what's recorded on camera. Okay. So outside of that, any questions with mowing in recreation?
Herd of goats.
Heard it go.
You know, we did try to hire goats. We did,
Really?
yeah. Couldn't get them to come over.
I think it was 1,200 a week,
Yeah.
and they had a 8-month, sign up ahead of time.
How many goats does it take? Mother's Day's coming up, I'm just thinking.
8 to 10 goats per acre works best, something like that. I didn't
Did that include
Can we get
cleanup
performance
of?
metrics on the goats? That's really my thing, is performance metrics.
Goats are better than other goats, you know?
I mean, you have to have it fenced.
I only want
Oh,
regional.
yeah, we're gonna have it fenced. But we gotta get 3 bids on the goat
All
fence.
right.
That's right.
Oh, no. Whoever has the goats has to provide the best.
All right, so
capital
any other
expenditure.
questions pertinent to recreation? Moving along to administration, Department 701 on 283. Okay, any questions on buildings and grounds? Okay,
Whoa, 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 whoa. I'm still worried about this
yeah,
boiler down 3570. And I'm still a little confused about this workshop and building and.
What are your questions, Helen? We're here. We're here to help.
Well, 3570,
dust
there's a
collector.
$30,000 for a boiler and 25,000 for workshop and others, which is the design, electrical, and so. So are we hoping that boiler manages to make it to the end of the year?
Well, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if something went our way? like
Right.
that?
What was this boiler? This is a.
That's public safety.
57,
Yeah,
5170.
that one is just the recommendation I got from boiler people, that 20-year is an estimated lifespan of it, and it's coming up on 20 years. That was the main reason for doing that.
Okay, so it's not, hasn't been
No, it's been
faltering or
functioning-
having problems?
It's been functioning fine over there.
Okay. But it's something that we should probably
Yeah,
look
it's one of those
forward.
things like Clay's been saying about getting the.
I think
Another
that
place for
building
reserve.
also is part of the study, which
Right.
will
It is.
capture that.
That's
Right.
that 3550 through 3570 is all that
Yeah.
review.
Yeah, and that'd make a big difference. We get another opinion of how bad the things need to be done. That'll be good.
I think that'll give us a good look, if you want the
Yes.
budget committee to come back as a meeting in July, August, so whenever they do it, and be part of the review of what they say.
It's really hard what I've asked Glenn to do, which is, he's been looking after these buildings day after day, week after week, month after month. And then we're gonna throw somebody in the middle of it to do a study to do, and I want Glenn to be able to download everything he knows into that, but we're gonna take our lead from what Glenn's learned, what they've learned, and put it all in a pot and really make some good decisions from that. But a lot of this is, Glenn had to start working on his budget in November. Before, we had come to terms with which buildings and where we're going with this, so there's a little bit of stop and start and in between here, but in large part, what's true is something we all know here, which is we have a lot of buildings that are all in need of a lot of work. And so, whether we end up with the specifics, I mean, we certainly know what Abby's building is, that's a boiler that's gone out and has had issues, but we have rotten windows, doors that need to be replaced, the public safety building, we have, studies we're doing on mold and the like, trying to make sure everything's,
They don't
where
get
it should
better.
be.
They don't get better without maintenance and
They-
upkeep. that's for
exactly.
sure. The weather has a tendency to wreck it all.
And I would say, though there were cuts here from what Glenn had proposed, I can support all the numbers he has in his column because I know they need to be done. It's just that, how much can we afford to do when we talk about all the other things that are coming on our plate? And that's really the balance, Helen, that I've been trying to strike here. Trying to give enough for Glenn so he can actually make better what isn't so great today, but not have that go in a situation where we're then undoing that work because we're gonna rip out that door, next fall. Those are the, so we have to be thoughtful about this, and some of this is wish casting and trying to figure out with Glenn, okay, do we take one step forward? It's hard to describe, so.
But it's a handy And it's handy now that we have a department to do it though, because we don't have to push people back and go, oh, we can't afford to do that now. We can just move around a little bit.
Yes.
If we can't get it quite financed, but still, we don't want to undo what we did.
Right.
Don't want to do too many temporary things.
Like
Duct
DOT.
tape and glue tarps. It just-
Fixes, paves it,
That's
and
not
then digs
how
it up
we
the
do
next
it.
year.
It's the best when I was a kid.
That's right.
Okay, anything else in buildings and grounds?
Excellent.
Okay, moving on to the town office. Department 702, page 289.
Don't you have municipal building?
Yeah.
91.
Yep.
Yeah.
291, yeah.
Yeah, is that separate? You're saying it's separate from what I said?
Well, the budget itself is 291, but all the talking is a
Oh.
couple pages before that.
Okay. So the municipal building, Department 702, that starts on 289, you're saying?
291 is the budget itself.
Yes, that's what
Yeah, but he's been doing the cover letter for
I know,
the whole
which is
way.
irrelevant.
Clay, you're irrelevant.
We're only 2.5 hours into it, Clay. I mean, we didn't want to tell you, but you've been doing it wrong the entire time. You did the wrong run.
Page 1. I mean,
We're gonna start over.
No time like the present. Just trying to start at the start of each section, Helen. I see you like to jump right in.
Yep.
Okay, anything in the municipal budget on page 291 that we'd like to change? Looks like we lost some revenue on copies, huh?
Business just hasn't been as good as it used to be. Digital world.
All right, anything else on municipal building, town office? Okay, moving on to municipal building, public safety building, Department 703, page 295, but the budget actually starts on 297.
Nicely handled.
Yeah.
Nice cover.
Right.
Leave this up.
Okay. And again, I think this is also where we were talking about maybe at some point next year, if there's some way to incorporate some gray lines or whatnot, so we can see what capital
Yeah.
will be referenced to the buildings and grounds that they're
Yep.
handling.
That's a good idea.
All right, building and grounds, municipal building, West Rockport Fire Station, Department 704 is next. Page 301, 303. Still, I think, gonna be a relatively new year for this one, so.
When's it gonna be done?
Oh, boy.
Ooh, you rolled your eyes really well.
Jason was up at a couple times last night.
9:30, 10:30, 11, 12:30, and 1.
For what?
We had 5 fire alarms, and then at 1 o'clock this morning, firefighter Leo.
Just in this building.
Yes.
Just to be clear, I just want to make sure.
Just this building, and then at 1 o'clock, he was woken up to another fire alarm that said smoke. Opened up the utility electrical room, and it was full of smoke. So
This is the new firehouse.
yes, the sprinkler pump burnt up at 1 o'clock this morning. And then we were out, and then we went out again at 4:40 this morning to right down the street here.
How much of that is covered under,
It's all covered.
okay.
They've already came today. The new pump will be here tomorrow. and installed Wednesday morning. It's under warranty.
How long is the building under warranty?
Depends upon what.
Which
part of it
Everything is
is.
completely
component?
different.
Yeah, there's different warranties for everything. And look, they all come with manufacturers of whatever
Right,
item.
okay.
Yeah. But,
The
so
actual
how-
construction, if the roof starts leaking.
well, we had that issue too, but that was during construction, so. You know, this is what happens when you build a big building.
Keep asking.
These issues just
Don't
keep happening.
keep asking.
His blood pressure is just gone.
Is there anything pertinent to this budget
Yeah,
right
there you
here?
Okay.
These line items that we want to pick apart.
54.
I'm trying to figure out if we need maintenance money is the reason I went with my, even though it's a
that's
new
valid.
building.
The hopes is the first year it will be very minimal. Obviously, time, wear and tear down the road, yes, but I'm really hoping the first year it's gonna be minimal. I mean, it's very condensed. Our boilers are only about this big, they're very small now, so things have been reduced down in size.
Radiant heat generator?
The Bay Area is all radiant heat and the rest is heat pumps.
I had a question about 5415, the general supplies. Department head says 12,005, and the manager says 4, but there's no explanation back here.
You cut it, so you have to explain it.
Yeah.
12,005 was the startup of a new building. My expectation is by July 1, we've already started up. So
Okay.
it should be our sort of standard operating. And we don't know what that is in this building, to be fair. So 4,000, that seems to be a number we've used in other buildings. But it could be 5, it could be 6, you know. I'll have a better answer for you a year from now, but,
Okay.
you know, it's not sort of an issue of that, it's just, I know it wasn't 12.5. That's the only number I was pretty certain, it wasn't 12.5. Yet. You know, I was gonna cut paper and food, but I heard we don't touch the food, so.
No.
Right, so, yeah.
Plays up for negotiation.
Sometimes we do our own things to cover those.
That's right, true, true.
Okay. Anything else on the West Rockport Fire Station?
Janet, anything?
Yeah.
Janet, the floor
And
is yours.
just so you know, I did answer most of the questions that Janet asked. I did verify Comstar. We set up a separate account. The payments go in as they receive them. There's obviously, they have to hold the payment to make sure it clears. Once that payment's cleared, it's not on a monthly, it's just automatically sent to us. And we do get a monthly report of everything we've submitted to what they've received and what they've billed. And we'll get those numbers once we get them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did it?
And we're skipping over the Department 705, correct?
Yep.
That's a budget I like.
Yeah, I would like to see a little more revenue though.
Touche.
All right, moving on to debt, long-term debt. Page 315, Department 801. Not really much we're doing about there, but we can budget for something else if we need. Okay.
Keep going.
Anything else? No, we'll move on, intergovernmental accounting. Department 851, page 325. Anything on county where we'd want to change? I know there's plenty we'd like to see changed, but any budget items we'd like to change? Okay, moving along on to cemeteries. Department 901, page 333.
I hate to talk again, but I'm going to anyway.
Let her rip.
Thank you. We discussed opening up sales to out of town. Can we rate, I know in a budget this big, this isn't a lot of money, but are we selling the lots for enough in comparison? Should we, if we have this big list of out-of-town people and we've got a lot, can we open it up that we'll sell so many lots per year to out-of-towners, or open up the market a little bit?
Fair question.
I think that is a fair question. I think maybe at some point that might be a little bit more of a bigger picture line item as opposed to a specific recommendation for the select board. But I think it's for sure something that we
Yeah. I have
need to
suspicion
talk
it's
about.
on that list.
It's on the list.
Oh, okay.
It's on the list. We heard
Okay.
you, we heard you,
Proceed-
Janet.
Procedure, well, move on. I'm good. I'm good.
We heard you, yeah.
All right, anything else on cemeteries, revenue, or expenditures? Okay, moving on to schools, Department 920, page 339. A little bit of a constraint there. but-
Any idea when we'll actually get it?
I was gonna ask, but I was afraid to talk.
No.
Have they even written it?
It hasn't been posted, so I mean, I'm still relying upon what I was given in that email. So I feel what we talked about that first night is still where I think this lands. But until they post their budget, it's sort of, it'd be probably improper to act on that. But I do think we will have that cut come our way, so.
What's the
Yeah, we
time
will.
frame for them doing it?
Well, they have to put their warrant, they have the same process we do in terms of placing on the ballot, so they work a little differently than we do. But I would expect that usually what happens when they do their budget process is they release their budget, they approve it the same night, and place it on a warrant, and it's all very fast in terms of the public, engagement side of this. There's a finance committee that's meeting on this, but, that's a little different in terms of the show that we have in terms of municipal budget. So I'd expect that within the next week, we'll probably have a public budget to react to. But that will likely come potentially after the select board meets, so. I mean, it's not really something we can do anything about either way, so it really doesn't matter, but at least in terms of all of our expectations, in terms of what our rates are, or what our expected overall increase from the commitment, it would be nice to know that in advance, publicly, other than, emails and so forth.
There was a $500,000 potential, so that's what
That's right.
right.
Yeah.
But that's not this, that would just be a windfall.
That would be a reduction of what's proposed
Right,
here.
right.
Yeah, that's right. So that's right. It's not included in what's in the proposed budget here. Yeah.
That'd be great.
But it would be great, absolutely, yeah. And if, that does, bring to mind other issues, so, yeah. Let's hope.
Okay, any other questions on schools? All right, moving on to special assessments, page 343. Budget's on 345. One of the things we breezed right over was just use of the unassigned fund balance. I don't necessarily know what that value should be. I guess our goal is to use that to try and curb what the,
Short-term interest?
yeah, and curb what the, public is gonna feel in a mill rate.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, I mean, it's, I don't know, does I necessarily have a recommendation on that one? I'll just stop. Okay, any other questions on special assessments?
What's the, looks like we have about 4 million of unassigned fund balance. Is that, do we generally just think of that as like rainy day funds?
It
Or
actually
do
helps us with cash
Just
flow
float,
issues.
sure. Yeah.
Because tax
That makes
payments are only
sense.
due twice a
Right.
year. We have to make
Oh, I
school
see.
payments
This
12
is
times
just-
a year.
Right, I see.
So it helps with our cash flow
Yeah,
issues.
I get it. So you don't want to run it to zero?
Definitely
Yes,
not.
no.
And just, just so you know, in terms of how it works, so, I mean, all of you know that the town collects all of the funds, right? But state law, the way state law reads, is that we are the last to be able to spend those funds. So the county has higher precedence over our funds than we do. The school has higher precedence over those funds than we do. So when we get the warrant and we have to write that check to the school, that, before we worry about paying our employees or plowing roads, which frankly we don't do in July, but mowing, okay, to pay the mowing bill, you have to deal with those school costs primarily. So it's a real, it's a challenge.
That makes sense. Well, I don't know if it makes sense, but I get it.
There you go, yeah.
Okay. So, any other questions? The actual, one question I had, when you say on the, on page 59, the available, balance is what is after all of last year's expenditures from there, right? Is the available is 406, 117?
It's actually a negative because the goal is to be at 20%. So to get to 20%, you'd have to add another $406,000 to it. Instead, we're taking out $420,000.
Okay, right, I see what you're saying. So that 406 is what we are less than our 20%.
Right.
Without using 420.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So, any other questions on special assessments? Okay, I think that mostly wraps it up. For any recommendations, which I don't believe we actually generated any specific recommendations for the ballot. I think most of it came through talking in our budget process. So moving on, I think, to what our second goal was tonight, if we want to open it up to, I think we open it up to anything that, bigger picture that we want to talk about now.
Just as a point of process, if you're gonna put it in a letter, it has to be a unanimous, well, not unanimous, but a majority for vote to do it.
Sure.
It's 5.
Right.
Yeah, you said 4. 4, not FOR.
In favor.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want me to run down what, Denise could, but do you want me to run down what's on that list?
Yeah.
In terms of this is
Sure.
This is what's
Yeah.
already, and again.
Make sure they're up to speed.
There hasn't been a vote here on that side, but this is just, sort of, these are the items that came up. Health insurance premiums, mowing costs, evaluating the pros and the inside, outside contractor, cemetery lot costs, columbarium evaluation, online tools and drop boxes to reduce time in the lobby of the clerk's office, evaluate road acceptance policy, identify buildings and grounds costs in each department, even if not part of that department's line item budget, sort of talking about, so you see holistically where that building is or what have you. Opera House, form an Opera House Foundation with interested individuals. Evaluate enforcement of parking limit, 2-hour parking, summer pay, parking downtown. Again, these are not unanimous, these are what came up, so I know there were a lot of, some of these had people on all sides.
Yeah, and the select board hasn't looked at this, these are just my
Right.
notes from what came up.
Yeah. Work with Camden on police staffing, role of county sheriff's office in that involvement. Harbor Committee working on considering storage of and fees for private floats and boats. Inviting the school board to attend the April select board meeting to discuss their budget. And then begin a dialogue on school costs. So that's 12 items that are sort of, part of the conversation that are already, one part of a conversation, I guess. Certainly there's others that came up tonight too, but the one thing I would just say before you figure out what to do, where to go, I had a chance to talk with Steve and Walker last week a little bit. Don't hold that against them. I think, one thing that's occurred every year, and I give you, a credit, because there's certainly an impulse to, when you get this budget, it's my job to make recommendations to bring this budget down. And, I certainly understand that, I appreciate it. What hasn't happened, in my opinion, and I see it from the select board side, because I go off and work with them for the next 12 months, right? Is taking the ideas and the thoughts that are brought forward, and then marshaling those ideas through to policy creation, or, whatever they turn into. If it's purchasing, maybe they cover a wide range of areas, right? And I think what this budget committee group has done differently than prior groups is that rather than sort of take the work, take the votes, and be done, and say it's on the record and be done with it. I think being able to say, I think what you're going to do is talk about where we go from here, what's next, because what's next is a lot more important. As impactful as this budget is, where we're going in a larger sense beyond this is really what you've learned through this process. And what I hear from talking with individual members of the select board, but is that there's a real desire to listen and hear what the thoughts are. Doesn't mean every individual thought turns into policy. It doesn't even mean the majority of the budget committee's thoughts turn into policy, obviously. But I think that there is the process that's been underway here is one that I think will be fruitful and will lead to some of the conversations that have been talked about, that I just ran down, that there's an appetite to talk about these things. Again, I don't know where they land or where they end up, but I do think that there's a desire to listen, right? Now, ultimately, it may come down, 6, 9, 10 months from now, 12 months from now, and we're in the same boat, and the budget, who knows? But I think it sounds to me like everybody involved wants to roll up their sleeves and get something accomplished, or at least talk about them and explore these ideas. Are there fruit? Do they bear fruit? Do they not bear fruit? The first thing out of mowing cost issue to me is, where are we going to store these mowers? Because we don't have room for the equipment we have now. That's something we'd have to figure out. Where are we going to hire these people? Again, these are all, it's a practical problem, and you maybe have practical solutions to these problems, but you have to vet them. All these ideas, you have to vet them, and, that's, I think that there's time to do that. So I appreciate sort of the approach that you guys are undertaking here to sort of take a longer run on this, because I think those are the things that can really make change, and in a positive way that helps everybody, employees, residents, taxpayers, those who are here for 3 weeks, those who've been here for 3 generations. So anyway, that's just my.
About 10.
Well, I'm not trying to. Some people haven't been here that long. But I think the big picture here is a good thing, and how you determine what's in a letter or not might be a hard thing to do, but see where you go with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my biggest thing now is having seen this group of people this year compared to the last few years. It feels like there's more drive amongst us that want to do it for more than just a month in the spring. So I think the next big thing that will actually accomplish something will be to meet again outside of this budget cycle. Whether it's before June, when we lose, I mean, June, we're losing 3 members. We're gonna have 3 vacant spots, in case anyone wants to take papers out. So we might, you know, we ought to at least get them up to speed. The budget process is a bit cumbersome for a new individual coming in, so I think a July meeting would be at least one step into, a July meeting at the very least will be a step into getting everyone geared up and at least keep the budget on everyone's mind in the off season.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And it seems like the select board and you are willing to take time to at least squeeze some more, make some fruit to harvest.
Let's keep going.
I wondered where you were going.
I know.
I mean, it feels like there's a couple of things, right? So there's the question, first question is there anything more we want to say or do about this budget document? Or are we just done with it? And I have a question about that, which is, my recollection is the old town warrants used to have the recommendation in the warrant, and it had a select board vote and a budget committee vote. Is that not the process anymore?
No.
And why was that change made?
So when the charter was reviewed, before there were any changes to it, it was determined that the method that was used by whoever was drafting the warrant articles at that time, it doesn't require, it doesn't ask for a recommendation on the budget. It only asks for, I could bring it up, but effectively the changes that the budget committee wishes to make to the proposed budget, not do you like this?
Do you like
Not
the budget or not?
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Right.
Which, you know, is common almost everywhere else you would ever go. But that's pretty clearly not what our charter said before or says now.
Okay. So the select board is going to do what it's going to do. I mean, our ability to say anything about the budget through official channels, through these channels, is over as of this meeting. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of.
It depends on what you're considering saying to say.
Well, that's why I'm trying to explore, like,
I mean,
what avenues do we have, you know, to say this is what we think about this budget. I mean, we went through, you know, we've gone through this process, and the question is, do we collectively as a, well, I don't know that we could do it in any official capacity anyway as a group, because we're sort of not, it doesn't sound as though we're authorized to do that anyway.
Well, historically, haven't committees been able to make statements to the media or whatever through the chair?
Yeah.
That the chair could initialize conversations in the public by virtue of their position as chair, and they may or may not want to describe, you know, that it's half and half of the committee, but they're empowered, for most committees, they're empowered to be the spokespeople.
Yeah, I think the hard part about that job in this committee, and good luck, Clay, is, you know, there are so many details, right, that you could, for some on a budget committee are very, very important. You know, that $500 could be the most important $500 in the whole $23 million commitment. And makes or break their recommendation on a given topic. I don't think that's the conversation this group has had, but that has happened in the past, so I don't want to suggest that's not part of it. But I do think, to Jeff's point, we just went through line by line or department by department through the budget, and there were no formal recommendations on those. If that's where the board, if that's where the committee stands, and it is more of a you know, and the chair is being asked to provide a broad representation of where the board, where the committee feels, I think that seems to be in the realm of what you could delegate. You also could have a letter that you draft and you all co-sign to. I think the issue that Megan's talking about in terms of the majority is you want to make sure it's a capture, it captures the spirit of the entire group, right? That's, it captures all of you, all 9 of you to some degree. And that doesn't mean it's unanimous, but it means that it captures the spirit of at least the majority of what the group would wish. But that can be a hard thing potentially to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
But I
again,
think it's
the battle, the ship has sailed, right, on this budget. So I almost think, that time is probably better spent, just as you said, like getting together after this process. And at least for me, revisiting this budget process. I mean, I've been in public service for a long time. It's been a long time since I had a frustrating experience as this, I have to say. Not due to anybody in this room, it's just the process that we have does not lend itself to the kinds of things that we need to tackle differently than we do. I mean, line by line, just it's not. So I think I'd rather us think through, like, how can we reconvene at some point, just as a group, and say, and not too far off, because I want this to be fresh in everybody's mind, like what in this process worked, what didn't work, what ways do we want to engage the staff, how much work do we want to do? I mean, so spending some, seriously, like I'm
through me to her.
Yeah, no, then, I was going around you. I don't worry about consuming your time. Megan's time is far more valuable.
Absolutely right. Yes.
But sort of rethinking, I'd like to rethink the budget development process and spend some time on that. And then there's a sort of separate chunk that's also, let's think ahead to what do we see coming around the building report that's going to come out this summer and those kinds of things. In my mind, those are 2 separate things. Maybe we can do those in a single meeting, Clay. I don't know. I mean, we can talk about how to do that. But there's in my mind, there's 3 things, right? There's this budget, what I think we're sort of done with. There's rethinking this budget process based on our experience of this budget. And then there's how do we start thinking about these big cost drivers going ahead that we talked about through this process of the last couple of weeks. So in my mind, those are big things. But
So it sounds to me, among other things, that this committee has both the energy and the expertise to take on some of the role that the capital committee used to do before its sudden demise. No. So I think that might add a 4th bullet to your thing, although your last point works into that. And so my question is, from your perspective in the charter, is there anything that is verboten in at least taking on some of those subject matters of long-term growth and debt and things like that?
Well, we are in uncharted waters, really, in terms of a budget committee that wants to work like this, right? I would be foolish to not say the select board probably should have the right to determine the policy and what the course is that we're going to navigate. And the 5 of them have not had a chance to really get together since all of this began, and they probably have their own thoughts. And which is not in any way to say that these aren't maybe 100% in conjunction with where they want to go. But I do want to give them the right to sort of chart a course with that. But again, everything I've heard and I think is that there's a desire to really these are big challenges for our group of 5 select board members. And really we're going to need all hands to make sure we get through this. When I look at these building issues in particular, that's what, these are the things that are truly impactful. But again, we've got 2 union contracts that are going to come up next year. We've got, if there's any conversation that needs to be about benefits and salaries, then that's a lot of time. We talk about staff time. That's a big staff time issue. That's now involving 2 more unions. That's involving employees. So, and to do that process justice, I'll say it now because so many are here, but I'd say if they weren't here, that's the process we have to involve our employees in. Now, ultimately, there may be votes that groups take that are not in completely conjunction where those employees may want to be, and everyone has their rights to do those things. But that's I think involvement of our, particularly our unions, but all of our employees represented in that conversation, because, you know, I think in that conversation the other night, the intent wasn't to reduce benefits, the intent is to reduce costs, right?
Correct.
So if you can do both of those things at once, who would argue with that, right? A lot of us who are employees are taxpayers too. We would love to not have to pay $500,000 that we don't need to. But there's a reason why it has cost $500,000 more, and so we need to talk about that, talk that process through. How do you get there? Where do you go? What do we lose? What do we gain? Do the cost benefit analysis. Everyone talks about what that means, and then at the end of the day, you know, policy gets made. And I think that's, you know, I think that's a process that can take through the summer and really into the fall. That's the prior effort when we looked at salary surveys, and I think that's a more engaged process than this would be. It took us a solid, you know, 4 months to get through that. So I think that's, you know, roughly the time you'd be looking at. But again, the idea is to do that before you come back here and do the 26-27 budget next year. You know, I think that's possible and doable. But I would also expect there's going to be a difference of opinion necessarily, potentially at the end of the day. And so being thoughtful about that and educating everybody, committee, select board, staff, the general public, about what that means, is going to be a big part of that. It's not going to happen in a closed room. It's not going to happen in a dark hallway. There'll be no brandy, no cigars. This is going to be an open process, and everyone's going to know every bit of it.
Yeah,
Sorry. Cigars stink anyway. Sorry, it's just not a good thing. So that's the process that I see, and I think you have employees that want to be involved in that. I think we'd have select board members who want to be involved in that. I'm sure there's members of this group that will as well. But there are a lot of items that we just talked about here, and I'm sure you got a list too, Clay, that you know, we may not have an answer for 26, 27 because they are so huge. They could swallow us whole. This building alone, we could spend, you know, meeting after meeting talking about. So it's, you know, these are issues that have plagued the town for decades. We're not going to think we could solve them all by next year is probably unrealistic, but let's try to hit the biggest ones and see what we can do. You know, that's, you know, if that's the direction the select board wants to take and figure out what that path is, it seems like there's room to do so. But
Okay. One place that keeps coming up in most of the buildings are these reserve files, these reserve accounts. And has anybody looked at the overall view, how many reserve accounts we have? There's a whole page of them here. How many of them are actually active? What are they for? Are they meeting the needs that they were set up for? Can some be eliminated? Do we need new ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the goal going forward, is trying to get a better idea of what, as a broad spectrum, we need to be saving money for and investing in as a anticipation of what we're going to be spending, as opposed to getting surprised and not having funds and then having to increase the budget.
And with the new library, we set up a reserve fund because we recognized eventually there's going to be tucking, or what do you do, the bricks, there might be.
Pointed bricks.
Yeah, and that's the elevator, all that sort of stuff, with the idea of spreading out the cost over the years. And now we've got a brand new fire station. We should probably have a reserve for that, 5, 10, 50, whatever a year.
Yeah. That's a good idea, Alan.
So,
It's a good idea.
And I think one of the things we have to do over the next year is develop points of view on specific things that we want to make decisions on when it comes budget time, and ways to inform that. So when it comes to mowing, what is our point of view on mowing? What is our point of view on out-of-town people in the cemeteries? Points of view on pulling in other contracts for and requisitions. So,
Yeah. All right.
yep.
So I'm thinking,
wrap that
I mean,
up.
Yeah, right there.
I think, you know, if we were to say what, I don't want to try and cut the meeting, but if we want to say what is our next step right now, currently, are we thinking we want to come up? Are there any recommendations or any letters that we want to draft with any material to the select board? Or do we want to basically, as we say, digest this budget as it is, and then kind of outside of this budget cycle is when we're going to start to work towards either next year or, you know, I mean, I think still the important thing to remember is this is just a budget. So even though we put numbers down for what we think we're going to spend, we can still, outside of that, get with whatever department it is and try and cut that cost throughout the year, whether it's as a committee or as an individual of the town.
So let me be careful.
Feels like micromanagement.
Let me just be careful about the individual part, right? Because individually you have no power. Collectively, as 5 of you have a lot of power to recommend what's on the budget. But now, having said that, I know each and every one of you, and I know if I saw you up at the post office or at Hannaford or outside at a play or something, and you bent my ear, I'm gonna listen to you, because I respect all of you, but realistically, individually, you're one of 3,700, you know, so I just wanna be clear about that. I don't want you to think, because don't want to get any airs about you, because you're on the highfalutin budget committee here. But no, I mean, remember, if you're going to work as a group, I would work together. I think that's the best path of, or individually through these different task forces that could be created if that's the path that the select board takes. I would suspect all of you want to be involved more, so it'd be great to have that help. Even though Doug said that those task forces don't get anything done, I would beg to disagree with him. I think he's gotten a lot accomplished in that time. So I just want to say that.
I mean, this may reflect the fact that it's 9:10, but, and I don't think I've got bandwidth to write a letter, but I think my, collectively or individually, I mean, I think I'd be inclined to see what the select board does on Monday and see what kind of discussion they have based on the list that we heard and sort of see how that goes. It doesn't mean we need to reconvene after that or take a position or write a letter or whatever, but at least we'd get a sense of what their sense is of the work that we've done and what they have to say about how they'd like to see the process change, if they want to see the process change, and we could take that into whatever next convening we would have as a group to say, okay, how do we rethink this? And there's probably arguments to be made to wait until after the new members are on or before. I mean, I feel like we've got some momentum. I don't know that I want to wait till July necessarily to reconvene and talk over, like, how could we do this again? You know what I mean? But
yeah.
But my recommendation is let's see what the board does, and then we can reconnect as we need to and map out next steps.
Could you, what if you got back together, you know, I think it'd be helpful in the absence of recommendations. It would be helpful, and I know this might be a painful ask for me to even put forward, given the difficulty where I think a lot of you struggled with this budget, but I'm going to say it anyway. It would be helpful to say to the public in a statement, we support passage of this budget, but we want to see these changes take effect. I realize that's a big ask for a group of people who obviously want to see change, but that is something that in this budget, absent recommendations, there will be those who ask the question, well, what does the budget committee want?
Well,
And it might be one way to do it.
Aren't we required to make some sort of a recommendation?
No.
No.
You effectively said no recommendations on the budget.
No, I mean, we need to say yay or nay.
We don't.
No.
No.
So that would be my.
We used to, but.
Yeah,
I know,
right.
they changed it without doing a commission.
we can sort of speak our collective opinion, but not give it a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Right. Just a thought.
So what are we thinking for a time frame? Possibly batting her like, we talking start of June, end of April, mid-April? Maybe just to at least get back together, even if it's quick, to see what, keep everything fresh, I guess, basically.
We have to have an organizational meeting after the election anyway, so that's June.
Right, the question is whether it's.
Yes.
Right.
Do we want to wait that long?
June feels far out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. to
It
me,
does.
too.
Yeah, especially
I think
it'll
it's
be
worth doing
mid-June,
this,
right? So it'll be
Yeah.
end of June realistically before we can find any time,
April.
which turns into July, and holiday,
Yeah.
which turns into end of July, which turns into December, so.
Yep.
And there's your year.
Clay's already put up his Christmas decorations.
Mid-May,
They're
Seth.
already up.
Never even taken down.
That's right, keep them up, just.
Yeah, I think, later in April,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
3 weeks out, maybe, something like that.
Last
Let the
week.
board chew on this and see what they do, and then reconvene and talk over, map out what we want to do.
Okay, I like it.
Me too.
Well, I'd like to congratulate Clay for
Yeah.
leading us through this. It's hard work, and I can really see your growth from year to year. But
Starting from zero.
good acceleration on that motor there. But anyway, I just wanted to.
Yeah, of course.
know
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
it's
job,
been a
Clay.
pleasure to be a part of it. Maybe not pleasure, but
Maybe not.
yeah.
Well,
But I
and
also,
thanks-
I think it's good too that we're, what'd you say, 67, 63 viewers at the start of the meeting? Somewhere around there, which I think,
Oh, no, that was of last week's meeting.
well, even
Of
still,
the
that,
tempest
but,
in the
of the year before and the year before that, I think those numbers have come up, so I don't know. Hopefully the general public is at least staying engaged in what we're doing. I mean, it's good to at least hear from people around town saying, oh, I saw you on TV or whatever. Usually they say other words, but here we are. At least they watched it.
Before we go, given this is the last time at least where this group and everyone else is here, I want to thank Megan.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
So hard, yes. Not just in putting this together, but keeping us fed and sugared up through this. And so, thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
You go above and beyond in so many ways, so appreciate that. That's all I've got, so thank you.
Anything
Thank
else
you
from the
all.
public before we adjourn?
Microphone? No? No?
Thank you,
No
John.
public comment.
Jock is
Okay.
shaking.